Welcome, friend, to another journey together. Tonight, you'll explore timeless teachings that have guided countless people toward clarity and calm for millennia. Feel free to share where you're listening from and what time it is for you. I'll be sharing a carefully chosen series of Zen stories, simple on the surface, yet rich with deep truths that can reshape how you relate to anxiety, anger, and the constant pull of desire. These aren't just bedtime tales. They are sacred echoes from awakened minds, masters who discovered what many forget. Peace doesn't arise from changing the world, but from changing how we meet it. As one Zen saying goes, when the mind is still, the universe surrenders. Through these stories, you'll begin to sense how this ancient insight can bring fresh transformation to your present-day life. As we move through each parable, you may find the edges of worry softening. The noise of your inner dialogue may begin to quiet. A natural stillness will begin to emerge, effortless, yet profound. These teachings have been carried across centuries in whispered conversations, in candlelit halls, in the stillness between breaths. Each story is like a lantern, casting light on a hidden corner of your inner world. Some will gently dissolve old patterns, others will leave you with questions more powerful than answers, and all will invite you back to the simplicity of being here, now. So settle in. Let the weight of your body be fully held. Take one slow, conscious breath, and as you release it, know that what you're about to hear is not random. These stories have been waiting to meet you. Let us now explore a story about the difference between seeing and truly experiencing. This is the tale of the blind calligrapher of Mount Furano. High in the misty peaks of Mount Furano stood an ancient temple, its weathered wooden beams holding centuries of prayer and meditation. Within these sacred walls lived a monk named Kenjiro, who had been blind since the moment of his birth. Yet despite never having seen a single character, brushstroke, or mountain vista, Kenjiro had become renowned throughout the land for his exquisite calligraphy. His reputation spread like ripples across still water, drawing students from distant provinces who would journey for weeks just to witness what many considered impossible. These pilgrims would sit in silent amazement as Kenjiro's brush moved across rice paper with fluid precision, each stroke emerging from some deep wellspring of understanding that seemed to flow directly through his hand. The characters he created possessed a quality that transcended mere technical skill. They seemed to breathe with life, to pulse with the very essence of what they represented. One autumn day, a famous calligraphy master named Hayashi arrived at the temple, his skepticism as sharp as the mountain air. He had heard the stories, of course, but found them impossible to believe. How can a blind man create beautiful characters? He demanded of the other monks, his voice cutting through the temple's peaceful atmosphere. This defies all logic. Show me this supposed miracle. When Kenjiro was summoned, he appeared with the gentle composure that marked all his movements. He prepared his inkstone with careful attention, grinding the black stick in slow, meditative circles until the liquid reached the perfect consistency. He selected his brush, testing its flexibility against his palm. But then, instead of beginning to write, he extended the brush toward his visitor. "Honored master," Kenjiro said with a respectful bow, "would you please write the character for mountain?" Hayashi took the brush with confident familiarity. His strokes were bold and sure, the product of decades of training and countless hours of practice. The character emerged on the paper, technically perfect, balanced, aesthetically pleasing by any conventional standard. Kenjiro ran his fingers across the dried ink, his sensitive touch reading the character like others might read a book. A subtle smile played at the corners of his mouth. "I can feel that you write as one who has looked at many mountains," he observed gently. "Your strokes show great technical mastery. But tell me, Venerable Master, have you ever been a mountain?" The question hung in the air like incense smoke. Hayashi frowned, puzzled by what seemed like nonsense. "What do you mean? How can a person be a mountain?" Kenjiro took back the brush, his fingers finding their familiar position around the bamboo handle. "When I write mountain," he explained, his voice soft but filled with quiet certainty, "I do not see its shape with my eyes. Instead, I become its stillness, that profound silence that dwells at the heart of stone. I feel its immense weight pressing down through countless layers of earth, its roots reaching toward the planet's molten core. I experience its peak touching the endless sky, where clouds gather and winds are born." As he spoke, Kenjiro's brush touched the paper. Hayashi watched, transfixed, as the character began to emerge. But this was unlike anything he had ever witnessed. The strokes seemed to grow from the paper itself, as if the mountain were pushing up through the white surface. Each line carried weight and presence. Each curve suggested vast geological time. The completed character seemed to possess actual depth, roots that disappeared into the paper's fiber, and a peak that somehow soared beyond the page's physical boundaries. "The character writes itself," Kenjiro concluded, setting down his brush. "I am merely the mountain's temporary hand." The Buddha once said, "Three things cannot be long hidden: the sun, the moon, and the truth." The deeper teaching here shows us that true mastery comes not from accumulating knowledge about something, but from dissolving the barriers between ourselves and direct experience. Why do we struggle so often with the difference between knowing about something and truly knowing it? Zen Buddhism reveals that our minds create a fundamental separation between observer and observed, between the one who experiences and what is experienced. This dualistic thinking becomes the veil between us and authentic understanding. We collect information, study techniques, and memorize facts, but remain distant from the living essence of what we're trying to comprehend. Consider how this pattern manifests in your daily life. You might know many facts about love, its chemical components, psychological effects, and social functions, yet still feel confused when facing your own heart's movements. You could study meditation techniques for years, understanding breathing patterns and posture guidelines, while missing the simple presence that breathes itself. You might analyze leadership principles and management theories without ever touching the natural authority that arises from genuine care and presence. The blind calligrapher represents what Zen calls beginner's mind, that quality of fresh, direct engagement, unfiltered by preconceptions. Because Kenjiro had never seen mountains, he wasn't trapped by visual memories or artistic conventions. His blindness became a doorway to a more intimate knowing, one that bypassed the analyzing mind and touched the mountain's essential nature. Zen master Dogen taught, "To study the Buddha way is to study the self. To study the self is to forget the self. This forgetting is not a loss, but a profound opening. When Kenjiro wrote, there was no separate self trying to create a mountain character. The boundaries dissolved, allowing mountain nature to express itself through his hand. This teaching invites us to examine our own relationship with mastery and understanding. Are you trying to know about your life, or are you willing to be your life? When you walk, can you become the walking? When you listen to music, can you dissolve into pure hearing? When you face a challenge, can you embody the solution rather than thinking about it? The Master Hayashi represents our conventional approach to skill development, accumulating technique, perfecting form, building expertise through repetition and analysis. This path has its place and value, but it can become a subtle trap if it keeps us on the surface of experience, admiring our own competence rather than surrendering to the deeper currents of creative expression. True mastery often involves a paradoxical letting go of what we think we know. The expert surgeon whose hands move with intuitive precision beyond conscious control. The musician who disappears into the music, allowing it to play itself. The parent who responds to their child's needs from love's natural wisdom rather than parenting theories. Tonight, as you engage with whatever activity calls to you, can you experiment with Kenjiro's approach? Instead of trying to do something well, can you allow yourself to become what needs expressing? Can you write as the words themselves, walk as the path itself, love as love itself? As the Buddha taught, when you realize how perfect everything is, you will tilt your head back and laugh at the sky. The perfection lies not in our technique, but in our willingness to disappear into the truth of each moment, allowing life to express itself through us with the natural artistry that flows when the small self steps aside. Our next story reveals a profound truth about the nature of distraction and inner peace. This is the tale of the temple cat's teaching. At Shorenji Temple, nestled in a grove of ancient cedar trees where morning mist lingered like prayers made visible, the daily rhythm of monastic life flowed with the predictable regularity of seasons. Monks rose before dawn, moved through their morning chants, tended the temple gardens, and gathered twice daily for seated meditation in the main hall. This peaceful routine had continued unchanged for generations, creating an atmosphere of deep tranquility that visitors could feel the moment they passed through the temple gates. All of this serenity, however, was regularly disrupted by a single, rather rotund tabby cat named Tama. She had appeared at the temple several years earlier as a kitten, and the monks, following their practice of compassion toward all beings, had welcomed her as part of their community. But Tama had developed what could only be described as a peculiar and persistent habit. Whenever the monks settled into their meditation posture in the main hall, arranging their robes and quieting their minds for the sacred practice of zazen, Tama would make her entrance. She seemed to possess an uncanny ability to sense the exact moment when inner stillness was beginning to emerge. At that precise instant, she would pad into the hall on silent pause and begin her rounds. Sometimes she would weave between the sitting monks, her tail brushing against their faces. Other times, she would leap onto a lap, settling her considerable weight onto legs already numb from sitting. She had a particular fondness for knocking over the small wooden bowls of water placed near each meditation cushion, sending droplets across the polished floors. On especially disruptive days, she would bat at the hanging bell near the altar, setting it chiming at random intervals. The head monk, Eisen, found his patience wearing thin as each meditation session became an exercise in managing frustration rather than cultivating peace. His jaw would tighten when he heard Tama's paws on the wooden floor. His breathing would become shallow when she knocked over yet another water bowl. The very sight of the cat padding toward the meditation hall would send waves of annoyance through his carefully cultivated composure. Finally, Eisen could contain his exasperation no longer. He approached the abbot, an ancient man named Sorin, whose weathered face held the deep calm of decades spent in contemplative practice. "Venerable teacher," Eisen said, bowing deeply, "this cat makes proper meditation impossible. Every session becomes a circus of distraction. We must remove her from the hall if we are to maintain the sacred atmosphere necessary for our practice." Abbot Sorin listened with the patient attention he brought to all matters, great and small. When Eisen finished speaking, the old teacher smiled with gentle amusement. "Tomorrow morning," he said quietly, "let us try an experiment. Instead of fighting Tama's disruptions, instruct each monk to simply continue meditating no matter what she does. Tell them to treat her actions as they would treat any other arising phenomenon in meditation, with awareness but without resistance." The next morning, as the pre-dawn gong signaled the beginning of meditation, Eisen shared the abbot's instructions with the assembled monks. Some looked skeptical, others resigned, but all settled into their sitting posture with a new kind of attention. They would meet whatever came with presence rather than reactivity. As if summoned by some invisible signal, Tama appeared at the entrance to the hall. She began her usual routine, padding between the seated figures, investigating water bowls, exploring the familiar territory of disruption. But something remarkable happened. When she knocked over the first bowl, the affected monk simply continued breathing steadily, his posture unchanged. When she settled her weight onto another monk's lap, he remained perfectly still, neither welcoming nor rejecting her presence. Tama paused, seeming puzzled by the lack of reaction. She batted at a robe hem, no response. She knocked over another bowl. The monk didn't even open his eyes. She even managed to set the small altar bell chiming, but the gathered monks remained undisturbed, their attention resting in the vast stillness that held all sounds. After perhaps 10 minutes of this, something extraordinary occurred. Tama simply walked to a corner of the hall, circled 3 times, and curled up for a nap. For the remainder of the meditation period, the only sound was the gentle rhythm of her purring, which seemed to deepen rather than disturb the pervading silence. When the session ended, Abbot Sorin gathered the monks around him. "You see," he explained, his eyes twinkling with quiet joy, "Tama was never the distraction. Your reaction to Tama was the distraction. She was simply being a cat, following her nature, exploring her world, living in the present moment. Once you learned to be simply monks, accepting what arose without resistance, she had nothing to disrupt." From that day forward, Tama became known as the most peaceful temple cat in the entire province, though she had not changed her behavior in the slightest. Buddha's wisdom reminds us, you will not be punished for your anger. You will be punished by your anger. This ancient teaching illuminates the heart of Tama's lesson, that suffering comes not from external circumstances, but from our resistance to what is. How often do we blame our inner turmoil on outside conditions? The noisy neighbor who disrupts our peace, the slow driver who triggers our impatience, the crying baby on the airplane who ruins our tranquility, the demanding boss who destroys our calm. Like the monks before their awakening, we point to external distractions as the source of our suffering, missing the deeper truth that our resistance is creating the problem. Zen Buddhism teaches that true peace is not the absence of disturbance, but the presence of equanimity in the midst of whatever arises. The Sanskrit word for this quality is sama, meaning equal or balanced. It describes a mind that remains steady, whether facing pleasure or pain, praise or blame, success or failure. This steadiness is not indifference or numbness. It's a vibrant, aware responsiveness that doesn't get caught in the endless cycle of attraction and aversion. Consider your own patterns of reactivity. Notice how your peace depends on external conditions aligning with your preferences. You feel calm when your environment is quiet, but agitated when it's noisy. You experience tranquility when people behave as you expect, but frustration when they don't. You find serenity when your schedule flows smoothly, but stress when unexpected disruptions arise. This conditional peace is inherently fragile because it depends on controlling circumstances that are largely beyond our influence. The world will not rearrange itself to accommodate our preferences. Cats will continue being cats. People will continue being people. Life will continue presenting us with an endless variety of experiences, many of which will not match our desires for how things should be. The deeper freedom comes from discovering what Zen calls our original nature, that fundamental awareness that remains undisturbed regardless of what appears within it. Just as the sky is not affected by the clouds that pass through it, this essential consciousness is not damaged by the thoughts, emotions, and sensations that arise and dissolve within it. Thich Nhat Hanh taught, "Thanks to impermanence, everything is possible." The very fact that all experiences are temporary, including our reactions to them, creates the space for a different relationship with difficulty. When we truly understand that this too shall pass, we can meet challenging moments with greater spaciousness. The monks' transformation occurred when they stopped trying to create perfect conditions for peace and instead learned to find peace within imperfect conditions. This shift from controlling to accepting, from resisting to allowing, opens the door to a stability that external circumstances cannot touch. This doesn't mean becoming passive or failing to take appropriate action when needed. If Tama had been genuinely destructive rather than merely disruptive, practical measures would have been warranted. The wisdom lies in distinguishing between situations that require external change and those that call for internal acceptance. Tonight, as you notice the various cats in your life, the small irritations, unexpected disruptions, and minor annoyances that disturb your preferred state of mind, can you experiment with the monk's approach? Instead of immediately trying to fix, avoid, or eliminate what troubles you, can you first observe your own reaction? Can you breathe with whatever arises, neither pushing it away nor clinging to it? As the Buddha taught, peace comes from within. Do not seek it without. The peace we seek is not hiding somewhere else, waiting for conditions to improve. It's available right here, right now, in the midst of whatever Tama happens to be doing in your life today. Let us continue our journey with a story about the transformative power of generosity in the face of apparent impossibility. This is the merchant's impossible delivery. In the bustling merchant quarter of a prosperous mountain town, where the sound of coins and conversation filled the air from dawn to dusk, lived a rice trader named Ichiro. He had built his reputation on reliability, always delivering his grain exactly when promised, regardless of weather or difficulty. His word was his bond, and his success depended entirely on this trust that he had cultivated over many years of honest dealing. One early spring morning, Ichiro received an urgent order from a village high in the mountain passes. The message was desperate. Their winter stores had run dangerously low due to an unexpected late frost that had destroyed much of their preserved food. They needed rice immediately, and they were willing to pay premium prices for fast delivery. For Ichiro, this represented not only significant profit, but also the chance to help people in genuine need. He loaded his strongest mules with the finest rice from his warehouse and set out before dawn, determined to reach the village within 2 days. The mountain path was treacherous, but familiar. He had traveled it many times before. What he had not anticipated was the information that reached him from other travelers. The main pass was now controlled by a band of desperate men who had turned to highway robbery as their own villages faced starvation. As Ichiro approached the narrow mountain defile where the bandits reportedly waited, his mind raced through impossible calculations. If he turned back, the rice would indeed spoil before he could find another route. The spring weather was warming, and grain could not survive long in such conditions. The village people would starve, and his reputation would be destroyed. If he attempted to fight, he was one man against several, and he carried no weapons besides a small knife for cutting rope. Desperate and unsure, Ichiro made a decision that surprised even himself. He turned his mules around and rode back to the nearest town, where he sought out the local Zen master, Sengai, who was known for his practical wisdom and unconventional solutions to seemingly impossible problems. "Master," Ichiro said, bowing deeply before the simple wooden hut where Sengai lived, "I face a situation with no good solution. I have a delivery that must reach a village beyond the mountain pass, but bandits control the road. I cannot go around, as my rice will spoil in this warming weather. I cannot fight them, as I am one man alone. If I fail to deliver, people will starve and my livelihood will be destroyed. What should I do?" Master Sengai listened with the deep attention that he brought to all problems, great and small. He sat in silence for several long minutes, his weathered hands folded in his lap, his eyes gazing at something beyond the immediate situation. Finally, he looked up with eyes that sparkled with unexpected mischief. "Go to the pass at dawn tomorrow," he said simply. "When you encounter the bandits, bow respectfully and offer them half your rice as a gift for their hungry families." Ichiro felt his heart sink. "But master," he protested, his voice tight with anxiety, "if I give them half my load, I won't have enough rice to fulfill my contract with the village. They've already paid me, and they're depending on the full amount to survive until their next harvest. I'll be ruined financially, and people will still suffer from hunger." Master Sengai's expression remained serene. "Trust me," he said, with the quiet authority of one who had seen beyond the surface of many seemingly impossible situations. Though every practical instinct rebelled against this advice, Ichiro had heard enough stories of Sengai's wisdom to override his logical objections. Reluctantly, carrying a heart heavy with doubt, he returned to his mules and made camp near the pass, spending a sleepless night wrestling with the master's puzzling counsel. At dawn, with the early morning mist still clinging to the mountainsides, Ichiro approached the narrow defile where the road squeezed between towering rock walls. As expected, 3 rough-looking men emerged from behind boulders, blocking his path. Their clothes were patched and worn, their faces gaunt with hunger, but their eyes held the desperate hardness of people pushed beyond their limits. Before they could issue any demands or threats, Ichiro dismounted from his lead mule and bowed deeply. "Good morning, friends," he said, his voice steady despite his racing heart. "I am bringing rice to the village beyond this pass. Would you accept half of my load as a gift for your families?" The three men looked at each other in complete bewilderment. This was clearly not how these encounters typically unfolded. The leader, a man with graying hair and intelligent eyes, despite his fierce appearance, stepped forward suspiciously. "What kind of trick is this?" he demanded, his hand moving instinctively toward the knife at his belt. "Merchants don't offer gifts to bandits. What are you really planning?" "No trick at all," Ichiro replied, meeting the man's eyes with genuine sincerity. "I simply thought that you and your families might be hungry. If you're blocking this road, you probably have good reason." A long silence followed, broken only by the sound of wind moving through the mountain peaks. The three men exchanged glances, some unspoken communication passing between them. Finally, the leader's suspicious expression began to soften, replaced by something that looked almost like wonder. "You're either the bravest man I've ever met," he said slowly, "or the most foolish." Then, unexpectedly, he began to laugh, not with mockery, but with genuine amusement, and what sounded remarkably like relief. "Very well, stranger. We'll help you unload half your rice, but I must tell you something that makes this situation rather interesting." As the four men worked together to transfer half of Ichiro's cargo to the bandits' simple packs, the leader continued his explanation. "The village you're traveling to, those are our families, our wives, our children, our elderly parents. We've been trying to get food to them for weeks, but we had no money to buy supplies. So he gestured helplessly at their makeshift roadblock. We became what we never thought we'd become." Understanding dawned on Ichiro like sunrise breaking over the mountains. Not only would he complete his original delivery, but these men would ensure that the rice reached the village safely. When he arrived at his destination, he was paid not only the original contract price by the grateful villagers, but also received an additional payment from the former bandits for reuniting them with their families and helping them find a way home with dignity intact. As the Buddha observed, generosity brings happiness at every stage of its expression. What emerges from this story is a profound teaching about the creative power of giving in situations that seem to demand taking or withholding. Why do we instinctively hoard when facing scarcity? Zen Buddhism points to a fundamental misunderstanding about the nature of abundance and security. Our conditioned mind operates from what psychologists call scarcity thinking, the belief that there is never enough, that we must protect what we have, and that another's gain necessarily means our loss. This mindset creates the very limitations it fears. Consider how this pattern manifests in your daily experience. When you feel pressed for time, you become stingy with attention, rushing through conversations and missing opportunities for genuine connection. When you worry about money, you may withhold generosity that could actually open new avenues of prosperity. When you fear criticism, you may hold back authentic expression that could invite the very acceptance you crave. The merchant's story reveals what happens when we act from abundance rather than scarcity, even when external circumstances suggest caution. Ichiro's willingness to give away half his rice came not from naive optimism, but from trust in a deeper principle, that genuine generosity creates unexpected connections, and reveals hidden possibilities. Zen teacher Suzuki Roshi said, "Each of you is perfect the way you are, and you can use a little improvement." This paradox applies to our resources as well. We always have enough for what truly needs to be done, and we can always find ways to share more than we thought possible. The bandits in this story represent the parts of ourselves and others that resort to taking strategies when giving seems impossible. When we feel desperate for attention, security, recognition, or love, we may become emotional bandits, trying to extract from others what we believe we lack. But like the hungry men blocking the mountain pass, these strategies often separate us from the very thing we're seeking. Notice how the merchant's approach transformed the entire dynamic. By offering what the bandits were preparing to take, he dissolved the artificial barrier between giver and receiver. The bandits became allies, the impossible delivery became inevitable, and everyone's needs were met more fully than anyone had imagined possible. This doesn't mean being naive about genuine danger or giving away resources needed for basic survival. Wisdom includes discernment about when and how to be generous, but it does suggest that our first impulse toward protection and withholding may blind us to creative possibilities that become visible only when we lead with openness. The Buddha taught, thousands of candles can be lighted from a single candle, and the life of the candle will not be shortened. Happiness never decreases by being shared. True abundance operates by different mathematics than scarcity. When we share attention, it multiplies. When we offer kindness, it returns magnified. When we give trust, it creates trustworthiness. Tonight, as you consider the impossible deliveries in your own life, the situations where you feel caught between competing demands, where resources seem insufficient for what's needed, can you ask yourself what gift might transform the dynamic? Instead of focusing on what you lack, what might you offer? Instead of protecting what you have, how might you share it in a way that creates new possibilities? As the Buddha said, give, even if you only have a little. Sometimes the smallest offering, made with genuine care, opens doorways that all our clever strategies could never unlock. Now, let us turn to a tale about the paradox of not knowing and true understanding. This is the story of the student who forgot to learn. At the respected Daikoji monastery, perched on a hillside where ancient pines whispered secrets to the wind, the daily routine of study and practice had remained unchanged for centuries. Young monks arrived eager to absorb the profound teachings of Zen Buddhism, their minds hungry for the wisdom that would lead them to enlightenment. They memorized sutras with dedication, debated philosophical points with passion, and competed quietly to demonstrate their growing understanding to their teachers. Among these earnest students was a young man named Myoan, whose presence had become something of a puzzle to everyone at the monastery. While his fellow students progressed through their studies with visible accomplishment, memorizing complex teachings within weeks, grasping the subtle meanings of koans within months, and advancing steadily through the various levels of understanding, Myoan seemed to comprehend virtually nothing at all. After 3 full years of instruction, he still struggled with concepts that newcomers mastered in their first month. When asked to recite basic sutras, he would stumble over words he had heard hundreds of times. When presented with simple koans meant to provoke insight, he would sit in bewildered silence, apparently unable to penetrate even their most obvious layers of meaning. His notebooks remained nearly empty, not from laziness, but because he seemed genuinely unable to grasp what others found elementary. The other students, initially sympathetic to his struggles, gradually began to whisper among themselves with a mixture of pity and disdain. "How can someone be so incredibly dense?" they would murmur during their evening meals. "He's been here longer than any of us, sitting through the same teachings day after day, yet he knows less than the newest arrival. Perhaps he simply lacks the intellectual capacity for this path." Some suggested privately that Myoan should be encouraged to leave the monastery and find a simpler life more suited to his apparent limitations. His very presence seemed to slow down the serious business of spiritual education, and his blank stares during lectures created an uncomfortable atmosphere for students genuinely trying to learn. The teaching master, however, showed infinite patience with Myoan's apparent slowness. There was something in the young man's sincere effort, his consistent attendance, and his humble acceptance of his seeming failures that prevented the teacher from giving up on him entirely. Perhaps, the master thought, some students simply needed more time to ripen into understanding. One afternoon, during a particularly advanced lecture on the profound subject of Buddha mind, that fundamental awareness that Zen teachings point toward as our essential nature, the master was explaining the subtle distinctions between ordinary consciousness and enlightened awareness. The concepts were complex, involving paradoxes that challenged even the brightest students' comprehension. As the master spoke about the elusive nature of mind itself, describing how it cannot be grasped or located yet, is intimately present in every moment of experience, the room filled with the intense concentration of students straining to understand. Some took copious notes, others sat with furrowed brows, wrestling with the philosophical implications, and a few nodded knowingly, as if they had grasped the teaching's deeper significance. In the midst of this intellectual intensity, Myoan slowly raised his hand, something he rarely did, perhaps from embarrassment about his inevitable confusion. The room fell silent as all eyes turned toward him, expecting another demonstration of his fundamental misunderstanding. "Master," Myoan said, his voice carrying its usual tone of genuine puzzlement, "I must confess something. I don't understand what Buddha mind is supposed to be, despite all your patient explanations. But I've noticed something rather strange over these past 3 years. When I try to find my own mind, this thing that everyone talks about so much, I can't seem to locate it anywhere at all. I've looked for it everywhere, but it never appears. Is this a serious problem with my practice?" The room became so quiet that the sound of wind through the pine trees outside seemed thunderous. The master stared at Myoan for what felt like an eternity, his expression shifting through surprise, recognition, and finally something that looked remarkably like joy. Then, suddenly and unexpectedly, the master began to laugh. Not the polite chuckle of social courtesy, but deep, spontaneous laughter that seemed to bubble up from some profound source of delight. The other students exchanged bewildered glances, unsure whether this was another example of Myoan's hopeless confusion or something else entirely. "You magnificent fool!" the master exclaimed, his eyes bright with tears of laughter. "You've been enlightened for 3 years and too wonderfully simple to notice it. While everyone else has been filling their minds with concepts about awakeness, you've been directly experiencing the very thing they're thinking about." The master turned to address the assembled students, his voice filled with amazement. What Myoan has stumbled upon through his beautiful simplicity is the direct realization that mind cannot be found as an object precisely because you are mind itself. He's been living in the very awareness that all our words and concepts can only point toward. The other students sat in stunned silence as the implications sank in. While they had been accumulating knowledge about enlightenment, debating theories about Buddha nature, and trying to achieve some special state of understanding, Myoan had accidentally stumbled into the immediate recognition of what they were all seeking. He became the first student in the monastery's long history to receive Dharma transmission, the formal acknowledgement of enlightenment, without having any idea what it was. Ancient Buddhist wisdom tells us, in the beginner's mind there are many possibilities, but in the expert's mind, there are few. Here we discover one of Zen's most profound paradoxes, that not knowing can be a more direct path to truth than accumulating knowledge. Why do we assume that understanding requires filling our minds with information? Our educational conditioning teaches us that ignorance is a problem to be solved through gathering facts, concepts, and theoretical frameworks. While this approach serves us well in many practical areas, it can become a subtle obstacle when applied to the direct recognition of our own essential nature. Consider how this pattern shows up in your spiritual seeking. You might read countless books about meditation without ever settling into simple presence. You could study various philosophies of happiness while missing the contentment available in this ordinary moment. You may analyze relationship advice endlessly while overlooking the love that flows naturally when you stop trying to figure it out. Zen master Huang Po taught, "The foolish reject what they see, not what they think. The wise reject what they think, not what they see." Myoan's foolishness was actually profound wisdom. He trusted his direct experience over conceptual understanding. When he couldn't find his mind despite everyone's theories about it, he reported this honestly rather than pretending to understand something he hadn't actually experienced. The other students represent our usual approach to learning, accumulating information, comparing our progress to others, and trying to achieve something we imagine we lack. This comparative mind inevitably creates suffering because it assumes that enlightenment is something to be gained rather than something already present to be recognized. What made Myoan's realization possible was his complete absence of spiritual ambition. He wasn't trying to become enlightened, demonstrate his understanding, or impress anyone with his insights. His very failure to grasp concepts created a spaciousness where direct experience could emerge naturally. This teaching doesn't advocate for intellectual laziness or dismiss the value of study. Rather, it points to the difference between knowledge that connects us more deeply with reality and knowledge that separates us from it. The former serves awakening, the latter can become a substitute for it. Notice in your own experience how the mind's constant commentary can obscure simple presence. When you watch a sunset, are you enjoying the colors and light? Or are you thinking about sunsets? When you're with someone you love, are you present with them or analyzing the relationship? When you sit quietly, are you experiencing the silence or having thoughts about meditation? The Buddha said, "It is better to travel well than to arrive." Myoan was traveling well without knowing he had already arrived. His willingness to remain in not knowing, to keep looking without finding, to stay curious without reaching conclusions, created the very openness that is enlightenment itself. Modern spiritual seeking often resembles the other students' approach, trying harder, studying more, practicing complex techniques, and measuring progress against imagined standards. But what if the very effort to become someone else, even a more enlightened someone, is moving you away from recognizing who you already are? Tonight, as you sit with whatever questions occupy your mind, can you appreciate Myoan's gift of not knowing? Instead of trying to figure everything out, can you rest in the mystery of your own immediate experience? Can you notice what's present when you're not trying to understand it, improve it, or solve it? As the Buddha taught, do not believe in anything simply because you have heard it, but after observation and analysis, when you find that anything agrees with reason and is conducive to the good and benefit of one and all, then accept it and live up to it. The deepest truth often reveals itself not through complex analysis, but through the simple willingness to see what's actually here, beyond all our ideas about what should be here. As we continue our journey through the wisdom of Zen Buddhism, let us explore a story about the unexpected teachings that arise from complete authenticity. This is the innkeeper's Zen. At a busy crossroads where mountain paths converged from all four directions, there stood a modest inn that served travelers making their way between distant villages. The location was ideal for business. No one could avoid passing this way when journeying through the region, but the inn's reputation was complicated by its owner's notorious temperament. Fujiwara, the innkeeper, was known throughout the area for his absolutely terrible disposition. He seemed to take personal offense at the very existence of his guests, greeting late arrivals with streams of curses and complaints. If someone knocked on his door after what he considered a reasonable hour, he would fling it open and immediately begin shouting about inconsiderate travelers who had no respect for hard-working innkeepers. If guests dared to rise early and disturb his morning routine, he would berate them for making noise and disrupting the peace of his establishment. Despite the steady flow of travelers who had no choice but to stay at his inn, Fujiwara managed to make virtually everyone miserable during their visits. He would slam down their meals with obvious resentment, mutter under his breath about the impossibility of pleasing demanding guests, and generally create an atmosphere of tension that made even the most exhausted travelers eager to leave at first light. One particularly stormy evening in late autumn, when the wind howled through the mountain passes and rain lashed the inn's wooden shutters, a traveling monk appeared at Fujiwara's door. The monk was soaked to the skin, his simple robes clinging to his thin frame, and his sandaled feet were caked with mud from the treacherous mountain paths. Fujiwara opened the door with his usual scowl, taking in the monk's bedraggled appearance with obvious displeasure. "Another one," he muttered, stepping aside grudgingly to let the monk enter. "I suppose you'll be wanting a room and expecting me to provide dry clothes and a hot meal as well. And don't you dare track that mud through my clean inn." The monk bowed politely, water still dripping from his travel hat. "Thank you for your kindness in providing shelter on such a difficult night," he said with genuine gratitude, which only seemed to irritate Fujiwara further. "Kindness!" Fujiwara snorted. "This is business, not kindness. And don't expect breakfast in the morning. I'm not running a charity for wandering monks." He showed the monk to a small room, continuing his litany of complaints about inconsiderate guests, terrible weather, and the general impossibility of running an inn when people insisted on traveling during storms. Throughout the night, the monk lay on his thin sleeping mat listening to Fujiwara's voice, carrying through the inn's wooden walls. The innkeeper seemed to be having loud, angry conversations with the storm itself, cursing the wind for rattling his shutters, shouting at the rain for driving against his roof, and generally expressing his fury at the weather's complete lack of consideration for his comfort and peace of mind. The next morning, as the storm began to clear and pale sunlight filtered through the clouds, the monk came to settle his bill. Fujiwara was already in a foul mood, having apparently spent a sleepless night battling the elements through sheer force of complaint. "I must tell you something before I continue my journey," the monk said, bowing deeply to the surprised innkeeper. "You are a remarkable teacher, and I am grateful for the profound lesson you shared with me last night." Fujiwara stared at him in complete bewilderment. "Teacher," he scoffed, his voice filled with irritation. "I'm an innkeeper, not a teacher. I don't know anything about Buddhism or philosophy or whatever it is you monks study. I just run this inn and try to deal with impossible guests and terrible weather." The monk smiled with the gentle joy of someone who had received an unexpected gift. "Last night, as I listened to you shout at the storm, curse at the wind, and rage at the rain, I realized something quite profound. The storm didn't become angry in return. The wind didn't argue back or defend itself. The rain didn't take offense at your complaints or try to justify its behavior. All of these natural forces simply continued being themselves, doing exactly what they do, completely unaffected by your emotional responses to them." The monk paused, allowing his words to settle before continuing. "You showed me that anger is just weather passing through the human heart. It doesn't change the essential nature of anything. The storm remained a storm, the wind remained wind, and the rain remained rain, regardless of your feelings about them. And you remained fundamentally yourself, a decent man providing shelter to travelers, even while experiencing and expressing your frustration." Fujiwara frowned, struggling to understand what the monk was suggesting. "But I was just angry. I don't like storms. I don't like being kept awake, and I don't like my routine being disrupted. What's remarkable about that?" "Exactly," the monk replied, his eyes bright with appreciation. "Pure, honest anger, without pretense or spiritual philosophy overlaying it. You weren't trying to be wise or enlightened or anything other than exactly what you were feeling in each moment. Very refreshing. Most people try to hide their emotions behind spiritual concepts or social politeness. You simply let your feelings be completely themselves, just as the storm let itself be completely a storm." The monk shouldered his simple traveling pack and prepared to continue his journey. "You taught me something I hadn't understood before, that accepting our emotions completely, letting them be exactly what they are without resistance or judgment, might be the first step toward moving beyond their control over us. Thank you for your authentic teaching." After the monk disappeared down the mountain path, Fujiwara stood in his doorway for a long time, pondering this strange encounter. He had never thought of his bad temper as anything other than a character flaw, something that made him unpleasant to be around and probably drove away potential customers. But something remarkable began to happen in the weeks that followed. His anger, oddly enough, began to fade, not because he was trying to suppress it or replace it with artificial kindness, but because he had finally accepted it completely. He discovered that fighting his own temperament had been like shouting at the storm, exhausting and ultimately futile. When he stopped resisting his natural responses, they began to transform themselves. Buddha spoke of this when he said, "What you resist persists. What you accept transforms." The heart of this lesson lies in understanding the difference between experiencing our emotions and being imprisoned by them. Why do we struggle so intensely with our own emotional weather? Zen Buddhism points to our fundamental misunderstanding about the nature of feelings. We believe that emotions define us, that anger makes us angry people, that sadness makes us sad people, that fear makes us fearful people. This identification creates a secondary layer of suffering as we judge ourselves for having human responses to difficult circumstances. Consider how this pattern operates in your daily experience. When irritation arises, you might immediately begin an internal commentary. "I shouldn't feel this way. This is unspiritual. If I were more evolved, I wouldn't react like this." This resistance to your natural response creates tension, and often prolongs the very emotion you're trying to escape. The innkeeper's story reveals what happens when we stop fighting our inner weather. Fujiwara wasn't trying to be angry. He simply was angry, and he expressed it without the additional layer of self-judgment that usually accompanies unwanted emotions. Paradoxically, this complete acceptance created the spaciousness for natural transformation. Zen teacher Pema Chodron says, "You are perfect as you are, and you could use a little improvement." This isn't a contradiction, but a recognition that genuine transformation begins with radical self-acceptance. We can't change what we're unwilling to acknowledge, and we can't heal what we're constantly fighting. The monk's wisdom lay in recognizing that the innkeeper's authenticity was actually a form of unconscious teaching. In our culture, we often mistake emotional control for spiritual maturity, but true freedom might be found in letting our feelings be completely themselves while remaining aware that we are the spacious awareness in which they appear and disappear. This doesn't mean indulging every emotional impulse or using our feelings as an excuse to harm others. Wisdom includes knowing when and how to express emotions appropriately, but it does suggest that our first relationship with difficult emotions should be acceptance rather than resistance. Notice how the innkeeper's anger was actually honest communication with reality. He didn't like storms, disrupted sleep, or muddy floors, and he said so directly. There was no pretense, no spiritual bypassing, no attempt to be someone he wasn't. This authenticity, rough as it appeared, created space for genuine transformation. The storm in the story represents all the circumstances in our lives that don't match our preferences. The weather of job stress, relationship conflicts, health challenges, financial pressures, and countless daily irritations that trigger our emotional responses. Like the natural storm, these situations often have their own logic and timing that exists independently of our feelings about them. The Buddha taught, "Hatred does not cease by hatred, but only by love. This is the eternal rule." But this love begins with loving acceptance of what we actually feel, not with trying to manufacture feelings we think we should have. The innkeeper's transformation began when he stopped hating his own anger. Tonight, as you notice whatever emotional weather is moving through your inner landscape, perhaps frustration with how slowly things are changing, anxiety about future challenges, or sadness about past losses, can you experiment with Fujiwara's accidental wisdom? Instead of trying to fix, improve, or spiritualize your feelings, can you let them be exactly what they are? Can you meet your own humanity with the same patience you might show to a storm passing through? As the Buddha said, the way is not in the sky, the way is in the heart. Sometimes the most direct path to peace runs straight through the center of our unpeaceful feelings, not around them. In accepting our inner storms completely, we discover the vast, calm awareness that remains undisturbed by any weather. Now, let us explore a story about recognition and the wisdom hidden in plain sight. This is the lesson of the visitor and the holy man. Word had spread throughout the countryside about a remarkable holy man who possessed extraordinary wisdom and spiritual power. People said he could answer any question, solve any problem, and provide guidance that would transform the most troubled life. He lived, according to these stories, in a simple house high atop a mountain, far from the distractions and corruptions of ordinary village life. A man from the valley below had been struggling with a persistent problem that seemed to have no solution. He had tried everything he could think of, consulting friends, seeking advice from local elders, even visiting other teachers. But nothing had brought him the clarity or peace he desperately sought. When he heard about the holy man on the mountain, he knew he had to make the journey, no matter how difficult it might be. The path up the mountain was steep and treacherous. The man climbed for hours under the burning sun, his feet growing sore, his breathing labored, his water supply dwindling, but his determination never wavered. He was certain that once he reached the top and met this legendary figure, all his troubles would be resolved through the holy man's superior wisdom and spiritual insight. Finally, after a grueling climb that left him exhausted and dusty, he reached the simple house at the mountain's peak. The structure was modest and weathered, exactly what he had expected for someone who had transcended worldly concerns. He approached the door with a mixture of anticipation and reverence, preparing himself to meet someone who possessed wisdom far beyond that of ordinary people. When he knocked, an elderly servant answered. The man was plain and unremarkable, his clothes simple, his manner humble, his appearance entirely ordinary. He looked like any of a dozen servants the visitor might encounter in his own village. "I would like to see the wise holy man," the visitor said, barely glancing at the servant as he spoke. His eyes were already searching past the old man into the house, eager to catch a glimpse of the extraordinary being he had climbed so far to meet. The servant smiled warmly and gestured for him to enter. "Please, come inside," he said gently, leading the way through the modest dwelling. As they walked through the house, the visitor looked around eagerly, his heart racing with anticipation. He examined every room they passed, searching for signs of the holy man's presence, perhaps special robes, sacred objects, or an aura of otherworldly peace. The servant continued to guide him quietly through the simple rooms, past basic furnishings and ordinary household items. Before the visitor quite realized what was happening, they had walked through the entire house and arrived at the back door. The servant opened it and gestured toward the path that led back down the mountain. The visitor stopped abruptly, confusion and disappointment washing over him. "Wait," he said, turning to face the servant with growing frustration. "I didn't come all this way to be escorted through an empty house. I want to see the holy man. Where is he?" The old servant's smile deepened, and his eyes twinkled with gentle amusement. "You already have seen him," he said quietly. "But, more importantly, I have a teaching for you that will solve whatever problem brought you here today." The visitor stared at him, not understanding. This ordinary old man couldn't possibly be the legendary holy figure he had heard about. Where was the radiant presence, the obvious signs of spiritual attainment, the dramatic wisdom that everyone talked about? "Here is the teaching," the servant continued, his voice soft but carrying absolute conviction. "Everyone you meet in life, even if they appear plain and insignificant to you, see each of them as a wise, holy man or woman. If you can do this, if you can truly see the sacred in every person you encounter, then whatever problem you brought here today will be solved." Buddha's wisdom tells us, if you want to know your past, look at your present condition. If you want to know your future, look at your present actions. This tale unveils the profound truth that we find what we're prepared to see, and our capacity for recognition determines what wisdom becomes available to us. Why do we search for the sacred in special places and extraordinary people, while overlooking the wisdom that surrounds us every day? Zen Buddhism points to our conditioning that associates spiritual truth with dramatic appearances, exotic circumstances, and obviously impressive figures. But the deepest teachings often come disguised as the most ordinary encounters. The visitor's problem wasn't really the external difficulty that brought him to the mountain. His deeper problem was his inability to recognize wisdom when it didn't match his preconceptions. He was so focused on finding someone who looked like his idea of a holy man that he almost missed the actual holy man standing right in front of him. Consider your own daily interactions. How often do you dismiss people because they don't seem impressive, educated, or obviously wise? The checkout clerk who greets you with genuine warmth, the janitor who works with quiet dignity, the child who asks innocent but profound questions. Any of these encounters might offer exactly the insight you need if you're prepared to receive it. This teaching transforms how we move through the world. Instead of searching for wisdom in special places or waiting for obviously enlightened teachers to appear, we begin to approach every person as a potential source of insight. The homeless person on the street, the difficult co-worker, even the family member who annoys us. Each becomes a teacher when we're ready to learn. Zen Master Dogen taught, to study the Buddha way is to study the self. To study the self is to forget the self. When we truly see others as sacred, we naturally forget our own ego's need to feel superior or special. The visitor's disappointment came from his attachment to being someone who had access to exclusive wisdom rather than someone who could recognize wisdom everywhere. The Buddha said, "Thousands of candles can be lighted from a single candle, and the life of the candle will not be shortened. Happiness never decreases by being shared." Every person carries this same capacity to kindle understanding in others, but only when we approach them with the recognition that they might have something valuable to offer. Look deeply at your current relationships and daily encounters. Where might you be overlooking wisdom because it comes in an ordinary package? What would change in your interactions if you truly treated every person as someone who might be a disguised holy man or woman? Tonight, as you consider the various people in your life, family members, colleagues, strangers you encounter, can you practice the holy man's teaching? Can you look past surface appearances and social roles to see the deeper wisdom that every conscious being carries? Can you approach tomorrow's interactions with the recognition that your next teacher might be standing right in front of you, waiting to be seen? As the Buddha observed, in the sky, there is no distinction of east and west. People create distinctions out of their own minds and then believe them to be true. The distinction between holy and ordinary, wise and simple, teacher and student exists primarily in our own minds. When we learn to see past these artificial categories, we discover that wisdom is everywhere, waiting patiently for our recognition. Now, let us explore a Zen story about the irreplaceable nature of direct spiritual transmission. This is the tale of Bankei and the messenger. In the bustling capital city, where merchants haggled in crowded marketplaces and scholars debated in tea houses, the renowned Zen master Bankei had completed another period of teaching at one of the great temples. Known throughout the region for his profound insight and ability to point students directly toward their Buddha nature, Bankei maintained a simple practice of traveling between temples, offering instruction wherever sincere students gathered. As the master prepared to depart for his next destination, carefully folding his few possessions into a traveling bundle, a well-dressed gentleman approached him with urgent politeness. The man's fine silk robes and careful manner suggested someone accustomed to moving in aristocratic circles, likely a retainer or aide to one of the noble families that supported the temple. "Venerable master," the gentleman said, bowing deeply, "I come with a request from the Baron. a man of great learning and sincere interest in your teachings. He has heard of your wisdom and wishes desperately to meet with you personally, but urgent matters have detained him today. Would you consider postponing your departure by 1 day so that he might have the honor of studying with you tomorrow? Bankei, despite his eagerness to reach the next temple where students awaited him, recognized the genuine need in the request. The path of a teacher required flexibility and compassion, even when inconvenient. "Of course," he replied simply. "I shall remain 1 more day." The master unpacked his bundle and settled back into the temple quarters, spending the evening in quiet meditation and preparation for what he anticipated would be a meaningful encounter with a sincere seeker. He had met many nobles over the years who approached Zen with genuine humility despite their worldly status, and he looked forward to offering whatever guidance might be helpful. The next morning arrived with clear skies and the sound of temple bells calling the community to meditation. Bankei waited in his designated meeting room as the appointed time approached. But instead of the Baron himself, the same well-dressed gentleman appeared again, this time with obvious embarrassment written across his features. "Master," the man began, his voice heavy with apology, "I bring regrettable news. The Baron was called away on urgent business that could not be delayed, matters of state that demanded his immediate attention. However, he has not forgotten his desire for your teaching. He has asked me to serve as his representative, to receive your instruction on his behalf, and carry your wisdom back to him faithfully." The gentleman paused, clearly hoping this arrangement would prove acceptable. "The Baron's specific question concerns the nature of mind itself. He wishes to understand, what is the true nature of consciousness, and how can one realize it directly? If you would share your teaching on this matter, I promise to convey every word exactly as you speak it." Bankei listened to this request with gentle attention, his expression remaining calm and compassionate. When the gentleman finished speaking, the master sat quietly for a moment, as if considering not just the question, but the entire situation, the absent seeker, the well-intentioned messenger, and the profound impossibility of what was being asked. Finally, Bankei spoke with characteristic simplicity and directness. "This matter of Zen is difficult to convey even through direct question and answer, between teacher and student meeting face to face. It becomes all the more difficult, indeed impossible, to transmit through a messenger, no matter how sincere or capable that messenger might be." Having delivered this response, the master said nothing more. He simply sat in silence, embodying the very teaching he had just articulated. The gentleman waited, perhaps expecting elaboration or alternative suggestions, but none came. Eventually, finding himself speechless and somewhat confused, the gentleman bowed politely and withdrew from the temple. The Buddha once said, "Be a lamp unto yourself." This profound truth reveals itself in Bankei's gentle but firm refusal to reduce Zen wisdom to a message that could be carried by proxy. Spiritual awakening cannot be transmitted second-hand because it is not information, but transformation. Why do we often approach spiritual learning as if it were academic knowledge that can be collected and conveyed through intermediaries? Zen Buddhism teaches that awakening is not a concept to be understood, but a reality to be directly experienced. Like the taste of water to someone who is thirsty, it cannot be adequately described. It must be experienced firsthand. The Baron's question about the nature of consciousness reveals our typical approach to spiritual inquiry. We want to understand awareness intellectually, to grasp it conceptually, to possess it as knowledge. But consciousness cannot be made into an object of study because it is the very subject doing the studying. It's like trying to see your own eyes without a mirror. The seeing itself is what you are trying to see. Consider how often throughout your day you might approach spiritual wisdom as information to be collected, rather than truth to be embodied. We read books about meditation instead of meditating. We study descriptions of enlightenment instead of investigating our present experience. We seek answers about the nature of mind instead of directly examining what we call mind right now. Zen Master Dogen taught, to study the Buddha way is to study the self. To study the self is to forget the self. This paradox points to the heart of why spiritual transmission requires direct engagement. The self that wants to understand Buddhism intellectually is the very construction that must be seen through. This seeing through happens not through accumulating knowledge, but through intimate investigation of immediate experience. The messenger in the story represents our own tendency to approach awakening indirectly. We want to understand consciousness from a safe distance, maintaining the illusion that we are separate observers studying an object called awareness. But awareness is what we are, not what we have. It cannot be possessed, understood, or transmitted because we are expressions of it. Bankei's silence after his brief explanation was itself a teaching. In Zen, silence often conveys what words cannot. The gaps between thoughts, the space between breaths, the awareness in which all experiences arise. These cannot be captured in language, but can be directly recognized when we stop trying to grasp them conceptually. This doesn't mean spiritual teaching is impossible or that teachers serve no purpose. Rather, it means that authentic teaching points students toward their own direct experience, rather than providing second-hand descriptions of someone else's realization. The teacher's role is not to deliver enlightenment, but to create conditions where students might recognize what they already are. Tonight, as you experience the simple fact of being conscious, aware of these words, aware of your body, aware of the space in which thoughts and sensations appear, can you investigate this awareness directly rather than through concepts? Can you be present to your experience rather than trying to understand it through someone else's descriptions? As the Buddha taught, work out your own salvation with diligence. The path to freedom cannot be walked by proxy. It requires your own feet, your own breath, your own willingness to look directly at what you have always been but perhaps never clearly seen. Our next story reveals the profound difference between spiritual performance and authentic understanding. This is the teaching of the head that wished to be severed. In the great monastery of Chao Chu, where hundreds of monks gathered daily for meditation and study, the morning routines followed ancient rhythms. After the pre-dawn sitting, as the first light touched the mountain peaks surrounding the monastery, monks would disperse to their various duties, some to the gardens, others to the kitchens, still others to copying sacred texts or maintaining the buildings. One particular morning, the venerable abbot Chao Cho made his customary walk through the monastery grounds, checking on the well-being of his students and the condition of their practice. His presence was both gentle and penetrating. Monks never knew when their most casual words might become profound teachings, or when their deepest spiritual insights might be revealed as mere intellectual concepts. As he passed behind the main meditation hall, a building where the community gathered twice daily for silent sitting, the abbot noticed a young monk sitting alone in the shadow of the wooden structure. The monk appeared to be engaged in some form of practice, though he was apart from the scheduled community activities. "Brother," Chao Cho called softly, approaching with the quiet steps that had become second nature through decades of mindful walking. Where have all the virtuous ones gone? The question seemed simple enough, almost like casual conversation, but those familiar with Chao Cho's teaching style recognized the subtle depth in his inquiry. Was he asking about physical location, spiritual attainment, or something else entirely? The young monk looked up with an expression of confident understanding. He had been at the monastery for several years and prided himself on grasping the essential points of Zen teaching. This seemed like an opportunity to demonstrate his comprehension of the Dharma. "They have all gone to work," the monk replied matter-of-factly, gesturing toward the various parts of the monastery where his brothers were engaged in their daily tasks. His tone suggested that the answer was obvious. Virtuous people naturally engage in productive activity rather than sitting idle. What happened next shocked the young monk completely. Without warning, Chao Cho reached into the folds of his robe and produced a sharp knife, its blade gleaming in the morning sunlight. But instead of threatening the monk, the abbot did something far more unsettling. With complete calmness, Chao Cho stretched out his own neck, exposing his throat to the blade, and handed the knife to the bewildered young monk. His voice remained gentle and conversational, as if he were making the most reasonable request in the world. "My responsibilities as abbot are many and demanding," he said with apparent sincerity. "I wonder if you could please cut off my head for me. It would be such a help in managing my duties." The young monk's eyes widened in horror. His hands trembled as he stared at the knife now in his possession and the exposed neck of his revered teacher. Everything about the situation contradicted his understanding of proper monastic behavior, spiritual teaching, and basic human decency. Unable to comprehend what was being asked of him or why, unable to see past the literal surface of the abbot's request to any deeper meaning, the terrified monk dropped the knife and ran. His feet carried him far from the meditation hall, far from the incomprehensible scene, his mind reeling with confusion and fear. Chao Cho calmly picked up the fallen knife, tucked it back into his robe, and continued his morning walk with the same peaceful demeanor he had maintained throughout the entire encounter. As the Buddha observed, it is better to travel well than to arrive. What emerges from this story is a teaching about the vast difference between intellectual understanding and genuine realization. Why do we so often mistake conceptual knowledge for authentic wisdom? Zen Buddhism reveals that our thinking mind loves to collect spiritual ideas and organize them into neat categories, creating the illusion of understanding without the transformative experience of direct insight. The young monk's response, "They have all gone to work," represents the kind of dualistic thinking that separates spiritual practice from ordinary activity. His answer implied that virtue lies in doing productive tasks rather than sitting idly, revealing his assumption that awakened activity and rest exist in opposition to each other. But Chao Cho's teaching cuts much deeper than this surface interpretation. By offering his neck to the knife, he was asking a profound question. If the monk truly understood that all the virtuous ones had gone to work, what work was most essential? If responsibility truly mattered, what was the most compassionate response to suffering? Look deeply at your own spiritual assumptions. How often do we divide life into spiritual activities and mundane ones, important work and trivial tasks, sacred moments and ordinary time? This dualistic thinking keeps us from recognizing that every moment offers opportunities for awakened response. The abbot's gesture points toward the heart of Zen understanding. Genuine compassion sometimes requires actions that transcend conventional thinking. When someone is truly suffering under the burden of responsibility, attachment, or spiritual seeking itself, what is the most loving response? Sometimes it requires cutting through the very thing that seems most precious: our concepts, our roles, even our sense of separate self. Zen master Linji taught, "If you meet the Buddha on the road, kill the Buddha." This famous saying points to the same radical teaching Cao Cho offered. Any fixed idea about enlightenment, any attachment to spiritual roles or concepts, becomes an obstacle to direct realization. True compassion sometimes requires destroying the very thing we think we're trying to protect. The young monk's terror and flight revealed how completely he missed this deeper level of teaching. He remained trapped in literal interpretation, unable to see past the surface of the abbot's words to their transformative invitation. His spiritual understanding, though articulate, remained purely conceptual. Consider your own relationship to spiritual responsibility and helping others. When someone asks for help with their suffering, do we offer concepts and advice, or do we respond from a deeper place of understanding? Are we willing to sacrifice our comfortable spiritual positions to meet others exactly where they are? This ancient wisdom illuminates the difference between talking about virtue and embodying it. The monk could identify where virtuous people go and what they do, but when faced with an opportunity for radical compassion, he fled. His knowledge remained divorced from spontaneous, awakened action. In Zen practice, we cultivate what's called great doubt, a willingness to question even our most cherished spiritual understandings. This doubt isn't cynicism, but openness to discoveries that transcend our current conceptual frameworks. Are we prepared to have our spiritual certainties challenged, even destroyed, if it serves awakening? Tonight, as you encounter opportunities to help others with their burdens, can you sense the difference between offering what you think they need and responding from genuine understanding? Can you feel how true compassion sometimes requires cutting through your own comfortable assumptions about what constitutes appropriate spiritual behavior? Buddha spoke of this when he said, "In caring for others, you care for yourself. In caring for yourself, you care for others." The abbot's offer to sacrifice his own head points toward this non-dual understanding. When we truly see interconnection, the boundaries between self and other, helper and helped, begin to dissolve into spontaneous, compassionate action. Now, let us explore a Zen story about the ultimate nature of spiritual truth. This is the encounter between the emperor and the master. In ancient China, there ruled an emperor known throughout the land for his devotion to the Buddhist path. Unlike rulers who concerned themselves only with wealth and territory, this emperor had spent years studying sacred texts, supporting monasteries, and seeking the deepest truths of existence. His palace library contained thousands of scrolls, and he had invited many learned monks to share their wisdom. When word reached him of a great Zen master whose understanding transcended conventional knowledge, the emperor immediately sent an invitation. He longed to test his own understanding against this master's renowned wisdom. The day of the master's arrival, the palace buzzed with anticipation. The emperor had prepared elaborate questions that would demonstrate both his devotion and sophisticated grasp of Buddhist doctrine. Surely such preparation would impress even the most accomplished teacher. When the master entered the throne room, he appeared utterly ordinary. His robes were simple and travel-worn, his bearing humble, yet alert. The emperor, seated on his golden throne beneath paintings of Buddhist saints, felt both excited and nervous. "Venerable Master," the emperor began, his voice echoing through the vast hall decorated with precious statues and sacred symbols. "I have studied the Buddhist teachings for many years. I have built temples, supported monks, and devoted my life to understanding the sacred path. Now I ask you, what is the highest truth of the holy Buddhist doctrine?" The emperor leaned forward expectantly, anticipating a profound discourse that would confirm his years of study. Perhaps the master would elaborate on the Four Noble Truths or reveal some secret teaching passed down through generations. Instead, the master looked directly into the emperor's eyes with a gaze that seemed to see through all pretense. His response came quietly. "Vast emptiness, and not a trace of holiness." Silence filled the throne room. The emperor blinked, certain he had misheard. Where was the elaborate explanation of Buddhist cosmology? Where were the references to sacred texts and divine principles? "If there is no holiness," the emperor asked, his voice betraying confusion and dismay, "then who or what are you? If there is no sacred truth to attain, what makes you a master?" The emperor's questions carried the weight of years spent accumulating spiritual knowledge and religious merit. He had built his identity around being a devout Buddhist ruler, and this master's words seemed to dissolve the foundation of that carefully constructed self-image. The master's response came with the same quiet directness. "I do not know." With these three simple words, the master had stripped away every concept, every identity, every claim to understanding that the emperor had accumulated. The master departed as simply as he had arrived, leaving the emperor in contemplative silence. As the Buddha observed, "Those who think they know, don't know. Those who know they don't know, know." This paradoxical teaching points to the heart of Zen understanding. True wisdom begins not with accumulating knowledge, but with recognizing the limitations of conceptual thinking itself. The deeper teaching here shows us that spiritual seeking often becomes another form of grasping. We collect teachings and insights like precious jewels, believing enlightenment lies in acquiring enough sacred knowledge. But ultimate truth cannot be possessed or described in conventional terms. The master's declaration of vast emptiness points to shunyata, often translated as emptiness. This doesn't mean nothing exists, but that nothing exists in the solid, independent way our thoughts assume. Every phenomenon arises interdependently without fixed essence. This emptiness is not a concept to understand, but a reality to embody. When the master says there is not a trace of holiness, he's not denying spiritual experience, but pointing to truth that transcends dualistic thinking, separating sacred from ordinary. The very search for holiness implies our present experience lacks something essential when completeness is already here. Consider how this teaching might illuminate your spiritual journey. Have you noticed how the mind tries to turn insights into possessions? We have powerful experiences and want to understand, categorize, and repeat them. Yet each time we grasp, we move away from the simple presence that made them possible. The emperor represents the sincere seeker who has confused spiritual materialism with genuine awakening. His years of study weren't meaningless, but they had become obstacles to direct recognition of what was always present. The master's "I do not know" represents the wisdom of don't know mind. This is not ignorance, but open unknowing that remains receptive to what is actually happening rather than filtering through preconceptions. From this mind, appropriate action arises without conceptual interference. In our culture that prizes knowledge, admitting "I don't know" feels like failure. But in Zen understanding, this acknowledgement becomes a doorway to fresh perception. The expert mind sees what it expects. The beginner's mind sees what is actually there. Tonight, as you rest in this moment's presence, what would it be like to temporarily set aside everything you think you know about spirituality? Can you taste the freedom in not knowing, the spaciousness that opens when we stop trying to fill emptiness with concepts? As the Buddha taught, in the sky, there is no distinction of east and west. People create distinctions out of their own minds and then believe them to be true. The vast emptiness the Master pointed to is infinitely spacious, containing all possibilities while being limited by none. In recognizing this emptiness as our true nature, we discover the most ordinary miracle. This moment, exactly as it is, lacking nothing. Now let us explore a story about the power of belief and the destiny we create through faith itself. This is the tale of the general and the coin that revealed truth. A Japanese general faced an impossible situation. His army was greatly outnumbered by enemy forces. The terrain favored his opponents, and by every conventional measure of military strategy, the coming battle should result in devastating defeat. Yet something deep within him remained convinced that victory was possible. Perhaps it was intuition, perhaps it was desperate hope, but he felt certain that his cause was just, and his troops, though fewer in number, possessed a fighting spirit that could overcome the odds. The problem was his soldiers. They could count as well as he could, and they had eyes to see the massive force arrayed against them. Fear rippled through their ranks like a contagion. Doubt clouded their faces. Whispered conversations filled with pessimism spread through the camp, and the general could sense that their morale was crumbling before the battle had even begun. He knew that an army convinced of its own defeat would indeed be defeated, regardless of any other factors. Technical skill, superior weapons, even numerical advantage means nothing when soldiers have already surrendered in their hearts. But an army that truly believed in its victory could accomplish seemingly impossible things through the sheer force of that conviction. On the morning of the battle, as they marched toward their destiny, the general led his troops to a small religious shrine that stood beside the road. This was a place where countless warriors had stopped over the centuries to pray before facing uncertain fate. The general gathered his men around him and led them in earnest prayer, asking for divine blessing and protection in the coming fight. When the prayers were finished, the general reached into his pocket and withdrew a simple coin. He held it high so that every soldier could see it clearly. "My brothers," he called out, his voice carrying across the assembled ranks. "We have prayed, and now we will let heaven itself reveal our destiny. I will toss this coin into the air. If it lands heads, we are fated to win this battle. If it lands tails, we are destined to lose. Let us discover what the gods have decided for us." The soldiers pressed closer, their breathing shallow with anticipation. Everything seemed to depend on this single moment, this one flip of metals spinning through the morning air. The general tossed the coin high, and every eye followed its arc as it rose, hung suspended for an instant against the sky, then fell back, down to earth. The coin landed and lay still in the dust. It was heads. A cheer erupted from the troops that could probably be heard for miles. Soldiers who had been grim and fearful moments before now laughed with joy and embraced each other with renewed confidence. The gods had spoken. Victory was assured. Their cause was blessed by heaven itself. Filled with this divine confidence, the soldiers attacked their enemies with such fierce determination and coordinated power that they achieved exactly what the coin had predicted. Against all odds, they won a decisive victory, routing forces much larger than their own and securing a triumph that would be remembered for generations. After the battle, as the general walked among his celebrating troops, his lieutenant approached him with wonder in his eyes. "General," the lieutenant said, "what an incredible thing. The coin revealed our true destiny, just as you said it would. Surely no human power can change what heaven has decreed." "You are absolutely right," the general replied with a knowing smile. He reached into his pocket and withdrew the coin, holding it so his lieutenant could examine it closely. "No one can change destiny." The lieutenant looked at the coin and gasped. Both sides showed heads. The Buddha once said, "All that we are is the result of what we have thought. The mind is everything. What we think, we become." Here we discover the profound truth that destiny is not something that happens to us, but something we create through the power of our own beliefs and expectations. Why do we so readily assume that fate is beyond our influence, when our own minds play such a crucial role in shaping what unfolds? Zen Buddhism teaches that while we cannot control all external circumstances, we have tremendous power over the internal conditions that determine how we respond to whatever arises. The general understood something profound about human psychology and the nature of reality itself. He knew that his soldiers' belief in victory was more important than their numerical disadvantage. He recognized that confidence, determination, and fighting spirit could overcome superior numbers when those qualities were genuinely present. But here's the deeper teaching. The general didn't simply manipulate his troops through deception. He created the conditions that allowed their natural courage and strength to emerge. The soldiers possessed the ability to fight brilliantly all along. They simply needed to believe in themselves and their cause. Consider your own relationship with destiny and possibility. How often do you assume that outcomes are predetermined, that success or failure is beyond your influence? The general's two-headed coin represents the power we all possess to tip the scales in favor of positive outcomes through the quality of our engagement with life. This doesn't mean we can control everything through positive thinking, or that believing in something makes it automatically true. The soldiers still had to fight the battle. They still had to demonstrate actual skill and courage. But their belief in victory created the psychological conditions that allowed their best qualities to manifest. In Zen practice, we learn to work skillfully with both effort and surrender, both intention and acceptance. We recognize that while we cannot dictate specific outcomes, we can profoundly influence the energy and attention we bring to any situation. This quality of engagement often determines whether we experience success or failure, regardless of external circumstances. Zen Master Huang Po taught, "The foolish reject what they see, not what they think. The wise reject what they think, not what they see." The general was wise enough to see that his soldiers' thoughts about the battle were more influential than their thoughts about their numerical disadvantage. He worked with the reality of psychology rather than fighting against it. Look deeply at the various challenges and opportunities in your own life. Where might you be carrying a tails mentality, assuming defeat before you fully engaged, focusing on obstacles rather than possibilities, letting fear determine your level of effort? And where might you need to create your own two-headed coin? A practice or perspective that consistently orients you toward positive engagement, regardless of circumstances. The Buddha taught, "We are what we think. All that we are arises with our thoughts. With our thoughts, we make the world." This isn't magical thinking, but recognition of the creative power of consciousness itself. When we approach situations with genuine confidence, clarity, and commitment, we often discover capabilities we didn't know we possessed. Tonight, as you consider the battles you're facing and the outcomes you're hoping for, can you find your own version of the general's wisdom? Can you create internal conditions that support your highest possibilities rather than your deepest fears? Can you recognize that while you cannot control destiny, you have profound influence over the beliefs and attitudes that shape how destiny unfolds through you? Buddha's wisdom reminds us, thousands of candles can be lighted from a single candle, and the life of the candle will not be shortened. Happiness never decreases by being shared. The general's confidence lit the flame of belief in every soldier's heart. Sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is create the conditions that allow others and ourselves to discover the strength that was there all along. Let us now turn to a tale of a young monk who believed he had failed in his spiritual journey. This is the story of the Golden Wake. At a peaceful monastery overlooking a serene mountain lake, a young student sat dejected on the temple steps as the sun began its descent toward the water. His shoulders sagged with the weight of disappointment, and his eyes reflected the heaviness in his heart. For months, he had struggled with his studies, unable to grasp the profound teachings that seemed to come so naturally to his fellow monks. "The boat is coming to take me home because I have failed in my studies here at the monastery," he said to his teacher, who had quietly approached and sat beside him. "What can I say to my family? They sent me here with such hope, believing I would return as a learned monk who could guide others on the path." The old teacher gazed out at the lake, where a small wooden boat was making its way slowly across the still water. The setting sun painted everything in shades of gold and amber. "Say that you did your best, and that is as much as anyone can do," he answered gently, his voice carrying the wisdom of many years. "But I wanted to be a famous monk and teach others," the boy replied, his voice thick with disappointment. "I dreamed of leading meditation sessions, of having students seek my guidance, of making a real difference in the world." "You can," the teacher said simply. "How?" asked the sad boy, looking at his teacher with confusion. "I couldn't even memorize the basic sutras. I fell asleep during meditation. I failed at everything that matters." The teacher smiled and pointed toward the water. "Live from your heart. I will show you. Do you see that boat making its way across the lake with the sun setting behind it?" "Yes," the boy replied, following his teacher's gaze. "Do you see its wake spreading across the lake? See how the boat looks like the apex of a golden triangle as the wake fans out from its bow?" The boy squinted, trying to see what his teacher described. "Sort of." "Squint," said the teacher patiently. "That boat is you as you leave the monastery. The lake is your life. The wake is the effect that you will have on the world. Each ripple triggers another ripple, which triggers another. By constantly striving to live as wise and loving a life as you can teach the path of love to everyone you meet simply by being yourself. A few of these people will pass on your good example to others. Thus, the expanding golden wake of good works begets other good works. Most important, notice how each ripple catches the sun and bounces its light back to heaven. The boy watched in wonder as the simple boat continued its journey, the wake indeed forming an ever-widening triangle of light upon the water. Each small wave caught the golden sunlight and reflected it back toward the sky in countless sparkling points. "Would you come home with me and explain all of this to my father?" asked the boy, hope beginning to kindle in his voice. Buddha's wisdom reminds us, a candle loses nothing by lighting another candle. The deeper teaching here shows us that influence spreads not through grand gestures or perfect knowledge, but through the simple authenticity of a heart committed to goodness. Why do we believe that only formal credentials or recognized achievements qualify us to make a meaningful impact? Zen Buddhism points to our attachment to external validation and our misunderstanding of how wisdom actually transmits from person to person. We imagine that teaching requires a podium, a title, or a certificate, when in reality, the most profound lessons are shared through the quality of our presence and the integrity of our actions. Consider how often throughout your day you encounter people who touch your life not through their expertise, but through their kindness, their patience, or their simple human warmth. The grocery store clerk who greets you with genuine care, the stranger who offers directions with a smile, the friend who listens without judgment. These people create ripples that extend far beyond their awareness. In Zen practice, we cultivate what might be called unconscious teaching. This is the natural transmission that occurs when we align our actions with our deepest values. Like the boat on the lake, we may not see our wake, but it spreads inevitably behind us, touching shores we never knew existed. The Buddha said, "Thousands of candles can be lighted from a single candle, and the life of the candle will not be shortened." Happiness never decreases by being shared. Each moment of authentic living becomes a teaching. Each act of compassion creates ripples. Each choice to respond with wisdom rather than reactivity sends light back toward heaven. Tonight, as you reflect on your own journey, can you see the golden wake you're already creating? Perhaps it's in the patience you show a difficult family member, the encouragement you offer a struggling colleague, or the simple presence you bring to everyday encounters. The light you reflect may be illuminating paths you've never imagined. Let us continue on our journey with a teaching about the dangerous gap between conceptual understanding and lived experience. This is the story of the one-eyed monk and the silent debate. In ancient China, when traveling monks wandered from monastery to monastery seeking teachings and testing their understanding, a particular custom had developed among Zen communities. Before a wandering monk could receive lodging for the night, he had to engage in what was called Dharma combat, with either the abbot or a designated representative. This wasn't physical fighting, but a contest of spiritual wit and understanding, where profound questions and paradoxical answers revealed the depth of each participant's realization. At one renowned monastery nestled in bamboo forests, a travel-worn monk arrived as evening shadows began to lengthen across the courtyards. His robes were dusty from mountain paths, his straw sandals worn thin, but his eyes carried the alert brightness of someone genuinely seeking deeper understanding. The abbot, busy with evening duties, assigned his personal attendant to conduct the traditional Dharma encounter. This attendant had served the monastery faithfully for many years, though he possessed what others might consider a disadvantage. He had lost one eye in an accident during his youth. Despite this physical limitation, or perhaps because of the clarity it had brought to his inner vision, he had developed profound insight into the Buddha's teachings. When the two monks met in the monastery's formal reception hall, the traveling monk proposed something unusual. "Let us engage in silent debate," he suggested, gesturing with his hands to indicate they would communicate through gestures alone rather than words. Sometimes the deepest truths transcend language altogether. The attendant nodded agreement, and they began their wordless exchange. The wayfarer raised one finger toward the ceiling, holding it steady with an expression of calm confidence. Without hesitation, the attendant responded by raising 2 fingers. The traveling monk, seeming pleased by this response, then raised 3 fingers. At this, the attendant surprised him by making a tight fist and holding it firmly in the space between them. The traveling monk's confident expression faltered. For a moment, he stared at the clenched fist, his face showing confusion and something approaching alarm. Then, without attempting any further gestures, he bowed quickly and left the hall. Soon afterward, he found the abbot and spoke with obvious respect and disappointment. "Venerable sir, your representative is far too advanced for me. I must continue my journey rather than presume to stay in your monastery tonight." The abbot raised his eyebrows with interest. "Please, tell me what transpired in your exchange." "Well," the traveler explained earnestly, "I began by holding up one finger to symbolize the Buddha, the awakened one who showed us the path to enlightenment. But your monk immediately responded with 2 fingers, indicating the Buddha and the Dharma, both the teacher and the teachings he offered. So I raised 3 fingers to represent the complete triple gem: the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha, the community of practitioners. But then he held up a clenched fist to show that all 3 are actually one unified reality. His understanding is clearly beyond mine, so I must seek instruction elsewhere before I could be worthy of staying here." The abbot listened to this interpretation with growing surprise, for he knew his attendant's character well. As the traveling monk departed into the gathering dusk, the attendant himself appeared, visibly agitated and breathing hard from running. "Where is that insolent rascal?" he demanded, his single eye blazing with indignation. "I've been looking everywhere for him. The nerve of that man! I've never encountered such rudeness disguised as spiritual inquiry." "What exactly happened?" the abbot asked, genuinely curious now about what had transpired between these 2 very different interpretations of the same event. "First," the attendant explained, his voice rising with remembered offense, "he insulted me by holding up one finger to indicate that I had only one eye. Can you imagine? Here I thought we were engaging in spiritual discourse, but he immediately drew attention to my physical limitation. Determined to remain polite despite such crudeness, I held up 2 fingers to acknowledge that he was blessed with 2 eyes. I was trying to show that I bore him no ill will for his thoughtless comment." The attendant paused to catch his breath, his agitation increasing as he continued. "But the scoundrel wasn't satisfied with that insult. Next, he held up 3 fingers to rub it in further, indicating that between the 2 of us, there were only 3 eyes total. He was deliberately emphasizing our difference, making sure I couldn't forget my disability. That's when I'd had enough. I made a fist because I was about to hit him for his persistent rudeness. But the coward saw what was coming and ran off before I could teach him proper manners." The abbot stood in stunned silence, contemplating this remarkable demonstration of how 2 people could participate in identical events while inhabiting completely different realities. The Buddha taught, "We see the world not as it is, but as we are." This profound truth reveals itself in the complete misunderstanding between our two monks, each of whom experienced the exact same gestures while living in entirely different interpretations of reality. Why do we so often project our own concerns, insecurities, and assumptions onto neutral situations? Zen Buddhism points to what it calls the 8 worldly winds: praise and blame, pleasure and pain, gain and loss, fame and disgrace. These psychological forces create internal weather systems that color our perception of everything around us. The attendant's sensitivity about his missing eye created a filter through which every gesture became a personal attack. His past experiences of being judged or pitied for his appearance had created such a strong interpretive framework that he couldn't perceive any other possible meaning in the traveler's hand signals. Similarly, the traveling monk's spiritual preoccupations caused him to see profound Dharma teachings in what were actually expressions of wounded feelings and growing anger. His framework of seeking enlightened instruction made him interpret increasingly aggressive gestures as increasingly sophisticated wisdom. Look deeply at your own patterns of interpretation. How often do your current worries, past hurts, or persistent hopes cause you to misread situations completely? Perhaps someone's distracted behavior becomes evidence they don't like you when they're actually concerned about a family member's health. Maybe a colleague's helpful suggestion feels like criticism because you're insecure about your performance. This ancient wisdom illuminates how our internal state creates our external experience. Both monks were sincere in their perceptions, yet both were fundamentally mistaken about what was actually happening. Neither was lying or deliberately misinterpreting. They were simply seeing through the lens of their own psychological conditioning. The story points us toward a crucial question. How can we develop the capacity to see situations more clearly, less filtered through our personal concerns and interpretations? Zen practice offers several approaches to this challenge. First is what's called don't know mind. Maintaining openness to multiple interpretations, rather than immediately settling on the one that confirms our existing beliefs or fears. When someone acts in a way that triggers our interpretation, can we pause and consider other possible explanations? Second is mindfulness of our own emotional states. The attendant might have noticed his rising sensitivity about his appearance and recognized how this was coloring his perception. The traveler might have observed his eagerness to find profound teachings and questioned whether he was seeing wisdom where none existed. Zen Master Bankei taught, "Your everyday mind, that is the way." This teaching invites us to examine the very mind that creates these interpretations, rather than constantly trying to figure out the correct interpretation of external events. The Buddha said, "Hatred is never appeased by hatred in this world. By non-hatred alone is hatred appeased. This is a law eternal." If the attendant had met the traveler's perceived insults with curiosity rather than defensiveness, if the traveler had questioned his assumptions about enlightened behavior, their encounter might have become a genuine teaching for both. Tonight, as you replay conversations and interactions from your day, can you notice how your own concerns and sensitivities might have shaped your interpretations? Can you sense the difference between what actually happened and the meaning your mind added to those events? As the Buddha taught, peace comes from within. Do not seek it without. By understanding how our internal weather creates our external storms, we discover the possibility of clear seeing that serves both wisdom and compassion. Our next story reveals a profound truth about how attachment can poison the very thing we claim to love. This is the tale of the chrysanthemum garden. In the countryside of ancient Japan, where autumn mists drifted through carefully manicured estates, there lived a wealthy baron whose passion bordered on obsession. His mansion stood proudly among rolling hills, but it was the rear garden that captured his heart completely. There, row upon row of chrysanthemums bloomed in magnificent splendor, their colors ranging from deep purple to golden yellow to pristine white. The baron devoted endless hours to cultivating these flowers, studying each variety with scholarly intensity, nurturing each plant with parental tenderness. His knowledge was encyclopedic, his dedication absolute. Yet this very devotion had transformed from love into something darker. The baron paid more attention to his chrysanthemums than to his wife and children. His household lived in constant fear, knowing that a single misstep near the precious flowers could result in severe punishment. Many retainers had felt his wrath for accidentally breaking off a blossom. The atmosphere had become oppressive, filled with anxiety and resentment. One autumn day, disaster struck. A faithful retainer, while hurrying to complete his duties, accidentally brushed against a prized chrysanthemum, breaking off its perfect bloom. When the baron discovered the damaged flower, his rage was volcanic. "Confinement!" he roared. The retainer was immediately imprisoned for this innocent accident. But the punishment felt so disproportionate that the retainer's shame transformed into desperate anger. According to the warrior code, he resolved to protest through seppuku, ritual disembowelment, preferring death to such humiliation over a mere flower. Word of this tragedy reached Zen master Sengai, a teacher known for his wisdom and compassion. Understanding that a man's life hung in the balance over botanical beauty, Sengai hastened to the estate and successfully prevented the suicide. But the master knew that saving one life would not solve the deeper problem. Sengai devised a radical solution. On a rainy night, when the chrysanthemums were at their most glorious peak, he sneaked into the baron's garden carrying a sharp sickle. Working methodically in the darkness, he cut down every single chrysanthemum, hundreds of flowers representing years of cultivation. The sound awakened the baron, who rushed to his window and saw a shadowy figure in his beloved garden. Grabbing his sword, he ran outside in alarm, demanding to know what this intruder was doing. Sengai stood calmly amid the devastation, surrounded by fallen blooms. "Even weeds like this eventually become rank if they are not cut," he replied with perfect equanimity. In that moment, the baron's obsession shattered like breaking glass. Seeing his flowers reduced to mere weeds in the master's eyes, he suddenly understood the distortion in his perception. It was like awakening from a fevered dream. From that night forward, the baron never raised chrysanthemums again. The Buddha taught, "Attachment is the root of suffering." This ancient wisdom illuminates what the baron discovered through Sengai's dramatic intervention. When we cling too tightly to anything, even beautiful things, we transform love into possession and beauty into burden. This profound truth reveals itself in the way attachment corrupts the very thing we claim to cherish. The baron genuinely loved chrysanthemums, but his attachment had poisoned that love, turning appreciation into obsession, care into control, and beauty into a source of fear for everyone around him. Why do we confuse love with possession? Buddhism explains that the ego mind seeks security through control, attempting to make permanent what is inherently impermanent. True love appreciates without grasping, enjoys without owning, cares without controlling. But attachment love tries to freeze beauty in place, to make the beloved an extension of our own identity. Consider how this pattern manifests in modern relationships. Parents who love their children so intensely that they become controlling, suffocating the very growth they claim to support. Partners who love so possessively that they create jealousy and mistrust. Collectors who become so attached to possessions that they lose the joy of experiencing what they own. The chrysanthemums represent anything we elevate beyond its proper place in the natural order. This might be our career success, our physical appearance, our spiritual achievements, or our carefully curated lifestyle. When we become too attached, we create suffering not only for ourselves, but for everyone in our orbit. Zen teacher Suzuki Roshi said, "Each of you is perfect the way you are, and you can use a little improvement." This paradox points to the delicate balance between appreciation and attachment. We can love something fully while holding it lightly, caring deeply while remaining unattached to outcomes. Sengai's radical action demonstrates the sometimes shocking medicine required to break through deep-seated attachment patterns. Sometimes we need external circumstances to strip away what we're clinging to before we can see clearly. Loss, disappointment, and impermanence, while painful, often serve as teachers, revealing the difference between genuine love and possessive attachment. Notice that the Baron doesn't simply moderate his gardening. He stops completely. This suggests that sometimes the most skillful response to attachment is temporary, complete withdrawal until we can relate to the object of attachment with greater freedom and wisdom. Tonight, as you reflect on your own life, what might be your chrysanthemum garden? What do you love so intensely that it creates stress, control, or suffering for yourself or others? Can you imagine appreciating these things fully while holding them more lightly? Buddha's wisdom reminds us, in the end, only three things matter: how much you loved, how gently you lived, and how gracefully you let go of things not meant for you. True love sets free what it cherishes, trusting in the natural flow of arising and passing away. Let us continue our journey with a story about the transformative power of fearlessness and unconditional compassion. This is the tale of the thief and the Zen master. One quiet evening, as twilight painted the sky in shades of purple and gold, Zen master Shichiri Kojun sat in his simple home, reciting ancient sutras. His voice flowed rhythmically through the peaceful rooms, each word a meditation, each breath a prayer. The soft glow of candlelight danced across the walls as he immersed himself completely in the sacred texts, finding deep tranquility in the familiar verses. Suddenly, the serenity was shattered. The front door burst open with a violent crash, and a desperate man entered, brandishing a sharp sword that gleamed menacingly in the candlelight. His eyes were wild with desperation, his clothes dirty and torn, his breathing heavy from running. He had clearly chosen this isolated house because he believed it would be an easy target. A peaceful monk would offer no resistance. "Money or your life?" the thief demanded, his voice trembling with a mixture of fear and aggression. He expected the old man to cower, to plead, to scramble frantically for whatever valuables he might have hidden away. But Shichiri didn't even look up from his sutra book. His voice remained calm and steady as he continued reciting for a moment before pausing to address the intruder. "Please don't disturb my practice," he said, with the same gentle tone he might use to ask someone to close a door. "If you need money, help yourself. It's in that drawer over there." He gestured casually toward a simple wooden chest, then immediately returned to his recitation as if nothing unusual had occurred. The thief stood frozen, his sword still raised, completely bewildered. In all his years of stealing, he had never encountered such a reaction. No fear, no pleading, no anger, just matter-of-fact helpfulness, as if he were a neighbor who had stopped by to borrow something. Shaking his head in confusion, but proceeding with his business, the thief moved to the indicated drawer and began gathering the coins and small valuables he found there. The soft sound of the master's voice continued behind him, reciting sacred words as peacefully as if he were alone. Just as the thief was preparing to leave with his stolen goods, the master's voice called out again. "Wait," Shichiri said, finally looking up from his book. "Please don't take everything. I need some of that money to pay my taxes tomorrow. Leave a little for me, won't you?" The thief stared at him in amazement. Here was a man who was being robbed, calmly negotiating the terms of his own robbery, as if they were conducting normal business. Almost without thinking, the thief returned some of the money to the drawer. As he turned to leave, certain that this strange encounter was finally over, the master's voice stopped him once more. "You took my money," Shichiri called out, his tone carrying a note of reproach. "And you didn't even thank me. That's quite rude, don't you think?" This final comment left the thief completely speechless. His sword hand began to shake. Never in his most violent encounters had he been so thoroughly unnerved. Here was a man who treated robbery as if it were a favor, who was more concerned about politeness than personal safety. Thank you," the thief stammered, and then fled into the night as quickly as his legs would carry him. Later, when the thief was caught and confessed to numerous crimes, including the incident at Shichiri's house, the master was called as a witness. The court officials expected him to demand justice, to describe the terror and violation he had experienced. Instead, Shichiri spoke with the same calm clarity he had shown that evening. "This man did not steal anything from me," he testified. "I gave him the money freely. He even thanked me for it, though it took a little reminding." The thief, sitting in chains, felt something break open in his chest as he heard these words. This man had not only shown him extraordinary kindness in the moment of the crime, but was now protecting him from the consequences. For the first time in years, tears came to his eyes. Not tears of self-pity or anger, but tears of recognition. He had encountered something he had never experienced before: love without conditions. Upon his release from prison, the former thief sought out the master and begged to become his student. Under Shichiri's patient guidance, he learned to cultivate the same fearless compassion he had witnessed that night. Years later, through dedicated practice and the master's unwavering belief in his potential for transformation, he attained the deep peace and wisdom of enlightenment. As the Buddha observed, hatred does not cease by hatred, but only by love. This is the eternal rule. What emerges from this story is the revolutionary power of meeting violence with absolute peace, responding to taking with giving, and answering fear with love. Why do we instinctively believe that force must be met with force, that aggression requires defensive reaction? Zen Buddhism reveals that this pattern, while natural, often perpetuates the very conflicts it seeks to resolve. When we respond to hostility with hostility, we simply escalate the cycle of suffering. But when we respond with genuine compassion, not passive submission, but active love, we create space for transformation that wouldn't otherwise exist. Look deeply at your own experience. When someone approaches you with anger, criticism, or demand, what is your automatic response? Most of us immediately mobilize our defenses, preparing to protect ourselves through counterattack or withdrawal. But notice what happens in your body and mind during these defensive reactions. Does the tension decrease or increase? Does the conflict resolve or intensify? Shichiri's response demonstrates what Zen calls skillful means, acting from wisdom rather than reflex. His fearlessness didn't come from being unaware of danger, but from understanding something profound about the nature of reality. He recognized that the thief's aggression arose from desperation and suffering, not from inherent evil. By refusing to see him as an enemy, Shichiri created the possibility for the thief to see himself differently. In Zen practice, we cultivate what might be called the courage of defenselessness. This doesn't mean being naive about genuine danger or allowing ourselves to be harmed unnecessarily. Rather, it means developing the confidence to respond to difficult situations from our highest wisdom, rather than our most primitive instincts. The Buddha taught, in the end, just three things matter: how well we have lived, how well we have loved, how well we have learned to let go. Shichiri embodied all three in his encounter with the thief. He lived from complete presence, loved without conditions, and let go of any attachment to his possessions or even his personal safety. Consider the people in your life who challenge you: the difficult colleague, the critical family member, the aggressive driver in traffic. What would it mean to meet their energy with the same kind of fearless compassion Shichiri showed? Not by agreeing with them or submitting to their demands, but by refusing to match their level of reactivity, by staying connected to your own center of peace, regardless of their behavior. Tonight, as you encounter your own moments of tension or conflict, can you remember the master who treated a robber as an honored guest? Can you find the space between stimulus and response where choice lives, where you can decide to meet aggression with peace, taking with giving, fear with love? Buddha's wisdom reminds us, better than 1,000 hollow words is one word that brings peace. Sometimes the most powerful response to violence is simply to remain unshakable in our commitment to compassion, knowing that love has a transformative power that force can never match. As we continue our journey through the wisdom of Zen Buddhism, let us explore a story about contentment and the nature of desire. This is the stonecutter's journey. High in the mountain villages, there lived a simple stonecutter who had discovered the secret of happiness without knowing it. Each dawn, he would climb winding paths to the quarries, his tools balanced across his shoulders. As he worked among the stones, he would sing old mountain songs that echoed across the valleys. Though he was poor by society's measures, living in a modest hut with few possessions, the stonecutter desired nothing more than what he had. His simple life felt complete: the rhythm of his work, the beauty of the mountains, the satisfaction of honest labor. His heart held not a care in the world. One day, he was called to work on the grand mansion of a wealthy nobleman. As he approached the estate, his eyes widened at the magnificence before him. Marble columns reached toward the sky, gardens sprawled in perfect symmetry. For the first time in his life, the stonecutter felt the sharp pang of desire pierce his contentment. "If only I were rich," he sighed. "Then I would not have to earn my living in sweat and toil as I do now." To his amazement, a voice whispered from the stones, "Your wish has been granted. Henceforth, anything you desire will be given to you." He returned home that evening to find his humble hut replaced by a mansion as magnificent as the nobleman's. Overwhelmed with joy, he abandoned his tools and began enjoying the luxurious life of the wealthy. But one hot afternoon, gazing from his ornate window, he saw the king's royal procession passing by. The monarch sat in cool shade, surrounded by noblemen and servants, appearing serene and powerful above the common heat. "How I wish I were a king myself," he thought, and immediately found himself reclining in silk cushions within the royal carriage. But the carriage proved warmer than expected. Even through thick walls, the sun's heat penetrated relentlessly. "I wish I were the sun," he declared, and found himself sending waves of light and heat across the universe. As the sun, he felt magnificent and all-powerful until thick storm clouds gathered, completely blocking his rays. "I wish to be a cloud," and so he became a massive storm cloud, glorying in his power to block the sun. But as he transformed into falling rain, he encountered an enormous rock that blocked his path completely. "A mere rock more powerful than I? I wish to be a rock." Suddenly, he stood tall upon the mountainside, feeling he had achieved true permanence. But soon, he heard chipping sounds at his base. Looking down, he saw a tiny human figure cutting chunks of stone away. "A puny creature more powerful than me! I want to be a man again!" And so he found himself once more a stonecutter, climbing familiar mountain paths. But now something had changed. As he shaped stones and felt mountain breezes, his heart swelled with deep contentment. His song returned, richer than before, because he had learned to be content with exactly who he was. The Buddha once said, "Health is the greatest gift, contentment the greatest wealth." This ancient wisdom illuminates the endless cycle of wanting that keeps us from recognizing the abundance already present in our lives. Why do we chase after different conditions, always believing happiness lies in the next transformation? Each desire fulfilled only reveals the next desire, creating an endless cycle of dissatisfaction. The stonecutter's journey reveals the futility of seeking happiness through external circumstances. Consider your own versions of this cycle. "I'll be happy when I get promoted," only to discover new stresses. "I'll be content with more money," only to find greater wealth brings new worries. Each achievement reveals the next mountain to climb. Zen teacher Suzuki Roshi said, "Each of you is perfect the way you are, and you can use a little improvement." This paradox points to the heart of contentment, the ability to fully accept what is, while still engaging wholeheartedly with life's natural changes. The stonecutter's final transformation wasn't into something greater, but into appreciation for what he had always been. His work remained the same, but his relationship to life was completely transformed. Contentment isn't found in having different experiences, but in bringing different awareness to whatever experiences arise. Tonight, as you notice the mind's habitual reaching toward what's not here, can you experiment with the stonecutter's final wisdom? Can you find the song that emerges when you stop trying to be anything other than what you are? As the Buddha taught, contentment is natural wealth, luxury is artificial poverty. The greatest transformation available isn't becoming something different, but recognizing the inherent completeness of what we already are. Now, let us explore a story about the nature of genuine assistance and the goal of true teaching. This is the encounter between the psychiatrist and the Zen master. At a gathering of professionals and spiritual teachers, a psychiatrist found himself in conversation with a renowned Zen master. The psychiatrist had built his career on helping people work through their psychological difficulties, analyzing their problems, and providing therapeutic interventions designed to improve their mental health and emotional well-being. Curious about how different approaches to helping might compare, the psychiatrist decided to ask the master a direct question that had been on his mind throughout their conversation. "I've spent years learning various techniques for helping people with their emotional and psychological struggles," the psychiatrist said. "I'm curious about your approach. Exactly how do you help people?" The master listened to the question with the same calm attention he brought to everything, considering not just the words but the assumptions underlying them. After a moment of thoughtful silence, he offered a response that was both simple and profound. "I get them to a place where they can't ask any more questions," the master replied. The psychiatrist paused, uncertain whether this was meant as a serious answer or perhaps some kind of Zen riddle. "I'm not sure I understand," he said. "Surely questioning is important in any process of growth and understanding." The master smiled gently. Questions arise from the mind that believes it lacks something. When someone reaches the place where questions naturally cease, they have found what they were truly seeking all along. Buddha's wisdom tells us, "Doubt everything. Find your own light." Yet this ancient teaching reveals a paradox. True finding comes not through endless questioning, but through arriving at a completeness where questions become unnecessary. Why do we assume that helping people means providing answers to their questions, when the deepest healing might involve dissolving the questioner itself? Zen Buddhism points to the possibility that many of our problems exist only because we continue to ask the questions that create and maintain them. The psychiatrist's approach, like that of most helping professions, focuses on analyzing problems, understanding their origins, and developing strategies for managing or resolving them. This method has value and can provide genuine relief for many forms of suffering. But the master's approach suggests something more radical. Helping people transcend the very framework that generates their problems. Consider the endless questions that occupy your own mind. How can I be happier? Why do I keep making the same mistakes? What should I do with my life? How can I find meaning? Each question implies a questioner who lacks something, who needs something, who must figure something out. But what if the questioner itself is the source of the seeking? In Zen practice, we discover that many of our problems are maintained by the very effort to solve them. The mind that constantly asks, "How can I find peace?" is the same mind that disturbs the peace that is naturally present. The person who desperately seeks enlightenment may be reinforcing the very sense of separation that creates the feeling of being unenlightened. The master's method of getting people where they can't ask any more questions isn't about suppressing inquiry or promoting ignorance. Rather, it's about guiding people to a direct experience of completeness where questions naturally dissolve because there's nothing more to seek. Zen Master Bankai taught, "The unborn Buddha mind can handle anything that comes up." When someone truly realizes their fundamental completeness, questions about how to be complete simply cease to arise. Problems don't need to be solved. They're recognized as temporary appearances in the vast space of awareness. This doesn't mean practical questions disappear entirely. What should I have for lunch? Or which route should I take to work? Are functional questions that serve practical purposes. The questions that cease are the existential ones that arise from a fundamental sense of lack or incompleteness. The Buddha said, "There is nothing to do, nothing to gain, nothing to lose." This teaching points to the same understanding the Master was indicating. True help comes not from giving people more to do or figure out, but from helping them realize they are already what they seek. Look deeply at your own relationship with questions and seeking. How much of your mental energy goes toward trying to solve the problem of your life rather than living it? What would remain if you stopped asking the questions that assume something is fundamentally wrong or missing? The psychiatrist helps by analyzing and providing tools. The Master helps by pointing to what needs no analysis or improvement. Both approaches can serve, but the Master's method aims for the root rather than the branches, dissolving the seeker rather than satisfying the seeking. Tonight, as you notice the questions that typically occupy your mind, can you sense what lies beneath them? Can you find the space of awareness that exists prior to all questions, the completeness that needs no answers because it lacks nothing? As the Buddha observed, peace comes from within. Do not seek it without. The deepest help we can receive or offer others is the recognition that what we seek has never been absent. Questions cease, not because they've been answered, but because the one who was asking them discovers there was never actually anything to ask about. Let us continue our journey with a story about the unexpected wisdom found in laughter and the suffering we create through taking ourselves too seriously. This is the tale of the monk who discovered his true teacher. In a remote mountain monastery in ancient China, there lived a young monk who approached his spiritual practice with tremendous intensity. Every morning before dawn, he would rise for meditation, sitting in perfect posture for hours without moving. He studied the Buddhist texts with scholarly precision, memorizing sutras and debating philosophical points with fierce concentration. His fellow monks often remarked on his seriousness and dedication to the Dharma. One crisp autumn morning, while studying a particularly complex passage about the nature of emptiness, the young monk encountered something that completely baffled him. The text seemed to contradict everything he thought he understood about Buddhist philosophy. The words appeared clear enough individually, but their meaning together seemed to dissolve into paradox the moment he thought he grasped it. Determined to understand, he carefully marked the passage and made his way to the master's quarters. The old teacher sat in his simple room, sunlight streaming through paper windows, creating patterns of light and shadow on the wooden floor. "Venerable Master," the monk said, bowing deeply, "I have encountered a teaching that I cannot comprehend. Could you please illuminate its meaning for me?" He recited the passage with careful precision, explaining his confusion and the various interpretations he had considered. The master listened attentively, nodding occasionally, his expression thoughtful and engaged. When the young monk finished his earnest explanation, something unexpected happened. The master's face suddenly broke into a broad smile, then quiet chuckling, and finally erupted into hearty, uncontrollable laughter. His whole body shook with mirth, tears streaming down his weathered cheeks. The monk stood frozen, completely bewildered. This was not the response he had anticipated. Where he expected profound wisdom and careful explanation, he found only laughter. The master's amusement seemed to fill the entire room, echoing off the walls and growing even more intense. Without offering any explanation, the master stood up, still laughing, and walked out of the room, leaving the young monk alone with his confusion and growing distress. For the next 3 days, the monk could think of nothing else. The master's inexplicable laughter haunted him constantly. He barely touched his meals, his meditation was scattered and unfocused, and sleep came only in brief, restless intervals. The question consumed him entirely. Why had his sincere spiritual inquiry been met with such puzzling amusement? Other monks noticed his distressed state, but his responses to their concerns were vague and troubled. He felt humiliated, confused, and increasingly agitated. Had the master been mocking his understanding? Was his question somehow foolish? Did his years of dedicated practice mean nothing? Finally, unable to bear the torment any longer, he returned to the master's room. This time, he didn't bow or recite passages. Instead, he spoke directly from his heart. "Master, for 3 days I have been deeply disturbed by your reaction to my question. I cannot eat, sleep, or meditate properly. Please tell me, why did you laugh at my sincere seeking? Have I done something wrong?" The master's expression became gentle and compassionate. He gestured for the young monk to sit beside him, then spoke with quiet clarity. "Monk, do you know what your problem is?" the master asked kindly. "Your problem is that you are worse than a clown." The words hit the young monk like a physical blow. His eyes widened in shock and dismay. "Venerable sir, how can you say such a thing? How can I be worse than a clown? I have dedicated my life to spiritual practice, to understanding the Buddha's teachings. I have sacrificed worldly pleasures and pursued wisdom with complete sincerity. How can you compare me to a mere entertainer?" The master smiled warmly and explained, "A clown's greatest joy comes from making people laugh. When others laugh, the clown feels fulfilled and happy. His entire purpose is to bring lightness and joy to the world. But you, when another person laughs, you feel disturbed, upset, and tormented. Tell me, are you not worse than a clown?" At these words, understanding dawned like sunrise breaking through clouds. The young monk saw immediately how his attachment to being taken seriously had created his suffering. He had been so invested in his image as a dedicated practitioner that he couldn't receive the master's joy. The laughter hadn't been mockery. It had been pure delight at the beauty of the Dharma expressing itself through paradox. In that moment of recognition, the monk began to laugh. First quietly, then with growing freedom and joy. He laughed at his own seriousness, at his attachment to understanding, at the beautiful absurdity of seeking enlightenment so grimly. His laughter joined with the master's from 3 days earlier, and in that shared joy, understanding flowered naturally. As the Buddha observed, if you light a lamp for somebody, it will also brighten your path. The heart of this lesson lies in recognizing how our reactions to others reveal the state of our own minds. Why do we become disturbed when others express joy in ways we don't understand? Zen Buddhism points to several patterns that create this type of suffering. First is our attachment to being understood and validated. The young monk's disturbance stemmed not from the master's laughter itself, but from his need for his question to be received with the seriousness he felt it deserved. Second is our identification with our spiritual image. When we become attached to being seen as sincere seekers, dedicated practitioners, or wise students, we lose the spontaneity and openness that allows genuine learning. The monk's investment in his identity as a serious practitioner made him unable to receive the teaching that was being offered through laughter. Third is our limited understanding of how wisdom can be transmitted. We expect spiritual teaching to arrive in familiar forms, solemn explanations, careful analysis, traditional formats. But enlightenment often comes through unexpected doorways. A master's laughter, a child's innocent question, the sound of a bell, or a moment of complete ordinariness. Consider how often we miss teachings because they don't match our expectations. Perhaps someone's casual comment contains exactly the insight we need, but we dismiss it because the person seems less knowledgeable than us. Maybe life presents us with lessons through situations we find annoying or people we consider frivolous. Zen teacher Suzuki Roshi said, "In the beginner's mind, there are many possibilities, but in the expert's mind, there are few." The young monk's expertise had become a barrier to learning. His certainty about how spiritual teaching should look prevented him from receiving the profound lesson being offered through unexpected laughter. The story points us toward a fundamental question. Are we seeking understanding, or are we seeking to be understood? Are we open to wisdom arriving in any form, or do we require it to validate our preconceptions? The master's laughter was a teaching about the joy inherent in the Dharma itself, the playful, spontaneous, beyond logic nature of awakened understanding. Tonight, as you encounter responses from others that don't match your expectations, can you remember the monk's revelation? Perhaps someone's laughter when you expected seriousness, their casualness when you hoped for depth, or their joy when you felt the situation called for gravity might contain teachings you haven't yet recognized. Buddha spoke of this when he said, "Thousands of candles can be lighted from a single candle, and the life of the candle will not be shortened. Happiness never decreases by being shared." The master's laughter was not diminishing the Dharma, but celebrating its inexhaustible joy, a joy the monk discovered he could share rather than resist. Let us continue on our journey with a cautionary tale about the perils of spiritual superiority. This is the story of the clever monkey. In ancient China, the Prince of Wu decided to take a pleasure boat to the famous Monkey Mountain, a place known for its abundant wildlife and scenic beauty. The prince, surrounded by his attendants and guards, approached the mountain with the casual confidence of royalty, expecting the natural world to accommodate his presence just as his human subjects did. As soon as the monkeys dwelling in the forest caught sight of the royal party, they fled in terror. The sound of chattering filled the air as dozens of monkeys scrambled up into the highest branches of the trees, their natural instinct warning them to hide from these human intruders. The forest, which moments before had been alive with playful monkey calls, fell silent except for the rustling of leaves as the creatures sought safety in the treetops. However, one monkey remained completely unconcerned by the royal presence. This particular monkey seemed utterly fearless, continuing his acrobatic display with remarkable skill and apparent indifference to the danger below. He swung gracefully from branch to branch, performing elaborate leaps and displaying his dexterity as if putting on a show. His movements were fluid and confident, each gesture demonstrating his superior agility and intelligence compared to his cowering companions. The Prince of Wu watched this extraordinary display with growing annoyance. Here was a mere animal that dared to show no respect for royal authority, that seemed to mock the very presence of the prince through its casual dismissal of the obvious threat. The monkey's confidence appeared to be a direct challenge to the prince's power. Deciding to teach this insolent creature a lesson, the prince drew his bow and shot an arrow directly at the monkey. But to the amazement of all present, the monkey dexterously caught the arrow in mid-flight, plucking it from the air as easily as one might catch a falling leaf. The monkey examined the arrow briefly, then tossed it aside with casual dismissal, as if such feats were nothing more than child's play. The prince's face darkened with rage at this humiliation. His skill as an archer had been made to look foolish by a mere animal. "Attack!" he ordered his attendants. "Bring down this arrogant beast." A volley of arrows filled the air. The monkey, suddenly overwhelmed by the coordinated assault, could not deflect them all. In an instant, he was struck by multiple arrows and fell dead to the forest floor, his extraordinary abilities proving useless against such overwhelming force. The prince turned to his wise companion, Yen Puyi, who had watched this scene unfold with growing understanding. "You see what happened," the prince said. "This animal advertised his cleverness. He trusted in his own skill. He thought no one could touch him. Remember that. Do not rely on distinction and talent when you deal with men." Yen Puyi absorbed this lesson deeply. When they returned to the kingdom, he reflected on how his own accomplishments and reputation might be creating the same dangerous pride that had destroyed the monkey. He quietly became the disciple of a humble sage, seeking to rid himself of everything that made him appear outstanding or special. He renounced the pleasures that had once defined his status and learned to hide every distinction that might set him apart from others. Through patient practice, Yen Puyi cultivated such genuine humility that soon no one in the kingdom knew what to make of him. He had become so ordinary, so unassuming, that people began to sense something profound in his very ordinariness. Thus, they held him in awe, not for what he displayed, but for the mysterious depth they sensed beneath his simple presence. Buddha spoke of this when he said, "Those who know do not speak, those who speak do not know." This tale unveils the spiritual danger of making our wisdom or abilities into a source of identity and pride. Why do we feel compelled to demonstrate our spiritual understanding or special qualities? Zen Buddhism reveals how the ego co-opts even our most genuine insights, turning them into tools for maintaining separation and superiority. The very achievements that should dissolve the sense of separate self can actually strengthen it when we become identified with being advanced or enlightened. The story points us toward understanding how spiritual pride operates. Like the monkey, we may develop genuine abilities through practice, deeper calm, clearer insight, or greater compassion. But when we begin to identify with these qualities, when we use them to distinguish ourselves from others, they become weapons that ultimately destroy us. This ancient wisdom illuminates a paradox at the heart of spiritual development. The more we genuinely progress, the more invisible that progress should become. True wisdom naturally expresses itself as humility, because it reveals the interconnected nature of all existence, dissolving any basis for feeling superior to others. Zen teacher Shunryu Suzuki spoke of "don't know mind" as the essence of beginner's mind. This is not ignorance, but the wisdom that recognizes how little our conceptual understanding actually penetrates the mystery of existence. The monkey's tragedy was believing his cleverness made him special rather than recognizing it as a temporary expression of universal intelligence. The Buddha taught, "Better than 1,000 hollow words is one word that brings peace." Yen Puyi discovered that by hiding his distinctions, by becoming nothing special, he accessed a more profound kind of influence, one that touched others through presence rather than performance. Consider your own spiritual journey. Can you notice moments when insights or abilities become sources of subtle pride? When meditation experiences, psychological understanding, or compassionate actions become ways of feeling different from or better than others? Each time we make our practice into an identity, we create the spiritual equivalent of the monkey's dangerous display. Tonight, as you rest in simple being, can you practice the art of being nobody special? Can you find the freedom that comes not from demonstrating your wisdom, but from resting in the ordinary mystery of awareness itself? As the Buddha said, those who are free of resentful thoughts surely find peace. The deepest peace comes when we release even our attachment to being peaceful. As we draw tonight's exploration to a close, take a moment to notice how the tranquility you've discovered isn't something you need to search for or create. It's already here, woven into the fabric of your being, waiting patiently beneath the surface of your everyday awareness. The Buddha once said, "Peace comes from within, do not seek it without." This ancient wisdom reminds us that the calm clarity you've experienced tonight doesn't depend on perfect conditions or special circumstances. It emerges naturally from your own capacity to be present, to breathe consciously, and to witness your thoughts without becoming entangled in them. Each story we've shared tonight has been a gentle invitation to remember what you already know deep down. That contentment flows not from grasping or controlling, but from learning to let go with grace. That genuine happiness arises when we stop wrestling with reality and instead learn to dance with what is. That true freedom comes not from changing our external world, but from transforming our relationship to whatever appears before us. Even when your mind wanders tomorrow, even when old patterns of worry or restlessness return, the insights you've gathered tonight have already taken root. They've settled into your awareness like seeds in fertile ground, ready to sprout whenever you water them with attention and kindness toward yourself. As you prepare to transition into rest, recognize that tonight's teachings have revealed not some distant philosophy, but a practical way of living with greater ease and presence. Feel how your breathing has naturally deepened, how your muscles have released their tension, how your thoughts have slowed to a gentler rhythm. These timeless principles aren't preserved in ancient temples or hidden in mystical practices. They're alive in the simple act of pausing, breathing, and returning to this moment. Tonight, you've remembered this truth, a truth that becomes luminous whenever we stop rushing and start noticing. As you carry this experience into tomorrow and beyond, take with you not just the stories we've explored, but the deeper understanding they've awakened. That peace isn't a destination to reach, but a way of traveling through life. Let this recognition be your compass, guiding you through both smooth passages and turbulent weather with equal grace. Thank you for joining us on this journey at Sleepy Monk. Sleep well